Nezuko stared in confusion at the scene before her. She was in her home, but everything seemed a little off. A glance outside revealed multiple trees were out of place, and the house seemed newer, in a way. Seated on the engawa was the man she saw after first performing the Hinakami Kagura. A sheathed katana rested beside the man, who was cradling an infant. Who is this man, and why is he sitting outside our home? Nezuko wondered, doing a double take when she spotted familiar earrings that the stranger was wearing. Was this man one of the Kamado family's ancestors? I brought some tea, a new voice spoke up, one that was almost familiar to Nezuko. But, much like her home, it wasn't the exact voice she remembered. And it sounded like it was right next to her. She tried to look around, but she couldn't do anything but look forward. As if her body wasn't her own. She finally managed to glance down, and almost yelped in shock. Why the hell am I wearing Tanjirou's haori? She wondered, unable to tear her gaze away from the familiar green and black material. Wait. It's not Tanjirou's. Repairs were missing, the fabric wasn't nearly as worn as she remembered. What in the world is going on? Thank you, the first man replied, bringing Nezuko's attention back to him. Thank you for watching over her. My wife is asleep in the other room, the second voice chuckled as Nezuko set down the tray, feeling herself smiling affectionately at the infant before turning back to the man cradling the little one. I really must apologize. I feel bad, making our guest babysit, he added as the infant was carefully passed over. Nezuko felt the weight in her arms, but her mind reeled with questions. Am I watching this through someone else's eyes? What is this? What am I seeing? Who am I hearing? It's all right, Sumiyoshi, the first man spoke up, picking up the cup of tea. It's not easy, giving birth and raising a child. She must be exhausted. He paused to take a sip of the tea. I will be leaving soon, though. I just don't want to overstay my welcome. Please, sir. You saved our lives that day, the second man, Sumiyoshi, countered. Was he the one whose body Nezuko was experiencing this dream through? If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here, nor would this child have been born. Sumiyoshi nodded to the infant in his arms. Come to think of it, his name did ring a bell. Sumiyoshi. Sumi. Isn't that another reading for the kanji for charcoal? Nezuko thought. She was very familiar with the kanji in question, since it was featured in at least one child's name in nearly every generation of her family. Usually the eldest son, like Tanjiro, and their father. Very well. Then, the least I can do is pass down your name for posterity. Sumiyoshi said, bringing Nezuko's attention back to the two men. That won't be necessary, the other man protested. But sir. Didn't you say you were at a loss, because you had no heir? Sumiyoshi asked. Look, I know I'm just a charcoal merchant, but it's better than nothing. Right? It's quite all right, the man assured him. He turned to Sumiyoshi, and Nezuko couldn't help gaping again. The mark Tanjiro developed after becoming a demon. She saw that same mark on this man, as well as her family's earrings. And yet, despite the seemingly demonic marking, the man stood in the sun without a burn in sight. Just who was this guy? Sumiyoshi, those who mstr their trade all arrive at the same place. The man stood up, grabbing his sword and sliding the scabbard into his belt. Even if the times change or the way to that place changes, they are certain to reach the same place, he continued, smiling oh so faintly toward the trees. A sad smile, filled with emotions Nezuko was all too familiar with. You seem to think I'm someone that's special, but I'm not. I cannot protect anything that's important to me, and I was unable to accomplish even one thing that I should have in this life. I am a man of no value. My name is as worthless as I am. Don't say that. Sumiyoshi's voice sighed as the man began walking away. But his voice seemed to echo while Nezuko felt his face pinch with concern. You're not a man of no value. So please, don't talk about yourself like that. What happened to make you feel that way about yourself? Nezuko wondered aloud as the world began to fade away. Nezuko opened her eyes to the ceiling on the butterfly mansion. Bandages covered pretty much her entire body, save for her face, and she could feel something poking into her arm. And if she had to guess. She groaned as she realized just how much pain she was in, even though she was certain she was on an ungodly amount of painkillers. Nezuko, a familiar voice exclaimed before Nezuko met familiar purple eyes. Hi, Kaneo. Nezuko mumbled, still drowsy from whatever meds were being pumped into her at the moment. Kaneo smiled, then turned to Nezuko's left. She followed the older girl's gaze, finding Tanjiro's box at her bedside. Has he been okay? He hardly left your side these last 2 months. Kaneo answered. He's come with me to the garden a couple times, but he clearly prefers to stay by your side. Yeah, he's a bit of a mother hen. Nezuko chuckled before focusing on the box again. I'm okay, Tanjiro. Thank you for your help. If it hadn't been for Tanjiro's blood demon art, Nezuko knew she, Yuzui, and Inosuke would have died in Yoshiwara. She wanted to reach out and pat Tanjiro's box, but her limbs felt like boulders were tied to them. Is she awake? A new voice exclaimed, bringing the two girls' attention to the Kikushi in the doorway. We told you to yell if she woke up. You're really scatterbrained, you know that. I don't care that you're my superior, Lady Tsuyuri. Not at the moment, at least, he snapped, stomping to the door and announcing that Nezuko was awake. Go easy on her. Nezuko mumbled. Soon enough, she was surrounded by several people. Sumi, Naho, and Aoi rushed in behind the Kikushi to check on her, and Kiyo came to Kaneo's side. Senjiro arrived shortly after. Nezuko. You're okay, he exclaimed as Aoi untangled herself from the sheet she had come in with. Thank goodness you're okay. Aoi gasped as tears welled up in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Nezuko. It's because of me that you all got hurt so badly. We talked about this, Miss Aoi. Nezuko volunteered, and so did her friends. Senjiro whispered, resting his hand on Aoi's shoulder. It's not your fault. Senjiro's right. Don't beat yourself up, Aoi. It's not like we expected Upper Six to be there. Nezuko replied, spotting movement on the ceiling. Movement that looked strangely like Inosuke, she asked, slowly turning to the ceiling to check that she had actually seen what she thought she saw. For all she knew, she had been given enough medicine to cause hallucinations. We almost lost him. He came so close to dying. Sumi answered. Mr. Inosuke fought for his life. Aoi wept. But there was too much poison in his body for his breathing to hold it all off. Oh, so he's not supposed to be clinging to the ceiling? Nezuko deadpanned, staring right into the glassy eyes of that familiar boar head. Everyone else followed her gaze, and quickly began screaming and yelling for Inosuke to get down and back to bed. So Nezuko wasn't hallucinating, then. Inosuke dropped from the ceiling and landed at the foot of Nezuko's bed. Excellent work, my minion. Inosuke cackled. I expect nothing less from the underlings of Lord Inosuke, of course. And don't forget, you promised me a meal when we were all recovered. Good to see you too, Inosuke. I'm glad you're all right. Nezuko chuckled, fighting to stay conscious so she could level Inosuke with a stern look. Now, you listen to the doctors, and go back to bed. I won't buy you anything unless you listen to them and get better. Inosuke straightened up and turned to the others. Whatever happened next, Nezuko didn't hear. Sleep was calling, and she was too tired to ignore it. While everyone kept talking over each other, Kaneo watched Nezuko drift off. She turned back to everyone else. Excuse me, she spoke up, trying not to impose. Shut up, you stupid boar. You heard Nezuko, you need to rest. That includes not bouncing around to get back to bed. Aoi snapped. Kaneo took a deep breath as the yelling continued, her frustration building as she kept trying to intercept the conversation and quiet everyone down. Could none of them see that Nezuko had fallen back asleep? I'm the boss here. Inosuke replied. You may be resistant to poison, but that makes you more resistant to our medicines, too. So get back to bed. Aoi yelled. Nezuko fell asleep, so everyone shut up. Kaneo yelled. She would drag them all out herself if they continued at this volume while their friend slept. Everyone turned to her with wide eyes, then turned to Nezuko. She went back into a coma. Goto exclaimed while Inosuke leaned in close. Please don't say ominous things like that. Aoi pleaded. The next week had Nezuko briefly regaining consciousness before drifting off again multiple times. Sometimes she woke up to Inosuke and Zenitsu sitting at her bedside. If it was night, she woke up to Tanjiro curled up against her side. Occasionally, she saw Tamayo and Yashiro at her bedside in the night, or the Butterfly Mansion girls during the day. When she finally managed to stay conscious for prolonged PRDS of time, and she got through her recovery training, Sumi came up to her. Hey, Miss Nezuko. Is everything okay, Sumi? Nezuko asked. Well, we wanted to tell you something. It's about your hair. Sumi replied, pulling out a mirror from behind her back. Nezuko accepted it, looking at the red streak. Huh. That's weird, she muttered. It had expanded. Is it from continued use of Hinakami Kagura? What the heck is with this streak? She wondered before Kiyo made her way into the room, a few sheets of paper clutched to her chest. From Haganazuka, the younger girl said as Nezuko opened it. Oh, dear. Nezuko thought. To say the letter was strongly worded would be an understatement. Haganazuka was screaming at her. With parchment and ink. Nezuko didn't think such a thing was possible, but here she was, feeling thoroughly berated by Haganazuka's angry scribbles that resembled quite a few things. Curses, the unsurprising death threats, and the declaration he had no sword for her. Did it say something that the death threats were the least worrying part of all that? Well, this isn't good. Nezuko muttered. And I didn't even break it this time. I was just asking for a sharpening job. It's not your fault swords are bound to get damaged. Sumi pointed out, crossing her arms with a pout. Mr. Haganazuka just happens to be unforgiving. Still. Nezuko groaned as she slammed her head on the table. This is the third time I've needed a sword repaired or replaced. And after a big fight, too. Maybe you could go speak to him in the swordsmith's village. Naho suggested. Nezuko turned to her with wide eyes. You can do that? She exclaimed. Yes. Kiyo giggled. Security is really tight to keep demons from finding it, but you can go and visit if you need to. Many slayers do, especially when they have specially made custom swords, like Lady Kochu or Miss Kenroji. Then I'll do that. Nezuko declared, getting out of bed to change into her uniform. As she shrugged off her medical clothes, Nezuko turned her gaze to the scar crossing her chest. The scar from the obi. She undoubtedly had a scar on the underside of her chin from the sickle. They're reminders that I survived. That's what matters. She told herself before donning her uniform. Once she was changed, Nezuko grabbed Tanjiro's box and prepared to leave the Butterfly Mansion. We're going on a quick trip, Tanjiro. I won't be facing any demons this time, at least. Nezuko whispered, getting quiet scratching in reply. Ah, Nezuko. She turned to Kyojira's voice, lighting up at the sight of her mentor. My apologies for not visiting sooner, Nezuko, he added with a gentle smile. It's okay. Nezuko assured him, walking up to the flame Hashira before hugging him. When I come back, we'll go on another mission. I missed getting the chance to do that. Hopefully, with no Upper Kizuki showing up. I also missed it. Kyojiro laughed. Indeed, we will, little sister. I look forward to it. Nezuko smiled from the contagious positivity coming from her mentor. We'll see you when we get back, she called out as she ran down the hall. The sooner she got to the village, the sooner she got her sword, and the sooner she could go on another mission. Once she got outside, she found a Kikuchi at the gate. Greetings, Lady Kamado. The MSTR has approved your request to go to the Swordsmith's village. I will be your guide, the Kikuchi told her. Thank you, I appreciate it. Nezuko replied with a smile. Before we go, the Kikuchi said, holding up various scraps of fabric. For security purposes, we need to cover your eyes and plug your ears, she informed her, pulling out more fabric from her uniform. Your brother will need to plug his ears and his nose, as well. We've been informed he has an acute sense of smell. Right. Nezuko replied with a nod, shrugging the box off her shoulders and taking the plugs she was handed. She opened the box, and Tanjiro quickly grabbed 2 of the plugs before stuffing them into his ears. He put the remaining plugs up his nose, scrunching his nose as he adjusted. You could probably take your muzzle off, so you can breathe. Nezuko whispered. Demons don't need to breathe, the Kikuchi behind her piped up, being leveled with a stern glare from Nezuko in response. MMPH, Tanjiro rolled over and curled up in the back of the box. Nezuko barely saw it, but he also pulled the bamboo off of his mouth before his breathing deepened. Nezuko smiled as she closed the box, her eyes being covered seconds later. After her ears were plugged, and she put Tanjiro's box back on her person, Nezuko was picked up. It was swiftly followed by the bouncing that came with someone running. Nezuko silently apologized to Tanjiro for the bumpy ride, even if she knew he was probably still sound asleep. As the BLNDFLD came off, Nezuko was greeted by an appealing village. She gasped as she spun to take it all in. This is amazing, she exclaimed. She almost felt right at home, with the mountains surrounding her. You'll be given lodging during your stay, the Kikuchi informed her. But first, you'll want to go to the chief's house. He's expecting you. Thank you. Nezuko replied with a bow, feeling a tap on her shoulder when she straightened up. She turned to see a masked man at her side. So it seemed the Hayatoko masks were a staple in the Swordsmith village. Oh, hello. Hello, Lady Kamado, the man said with a wave. It's a pleasure to meet you. I will be guiding you to the chief's home. If you'll follow me. Nezuko nodded, following the masked man through the village. She listened intently to the information provided to her on the tour to the chief's house, watching the swordsmiths. Work. This is amazing, she gasped, turning to her guide. You all must work very hard. I'm sure the Corps always appreciates the work you all do. Thank you, Lady Kamado, the guide chuckled before continuing down the path. Nezuko followed close behind, being led to a large house. After entering, she found herself being greeted by 3 figures. An elderly man, smaller than the other 2, sat in the middle. Hello, Lady Kamado, the elderly man said. Oh, please, you don't have to call me Lady Kamado. The formality isn't needed. Nezuko piped up, raising her hand a little with a shy smile. No need to be modest, young lady, the elderly man chuckled. We treat all demon slayers with the utmost respect, but especially the Hashira and their Tsugukos. It's the least you deserve for all you've done, he added. I am Chief Tekikawahara Tekken. I may be the smallest person in this village, but I am also the most important. It's an honor to meet you, sir. Nezuko replied, lowering herself into a deep bow. Such a respectful young lady, the chief hummed. Please, Lady Kamado, help yourself to some sweets, he added, gesturing to the bowl beside Nezuko. She nodded, accepting the bowl and picking up a small handful of the sweets within. They're delicious, thank you, she said after eating the handful. Now. You're here about Hataru, yes? The chief asked. Hataru? Nezuko tilted her head. Yes. Haganazuka Hataru, your swordsmith, the chief explained. Oh. Nezuko gasped. Yes, I am. I didn't expect the guy who tries to stab his customers over accidental breaks to have such a sweet name. Yes. I was the one to name him, the chief chuckled. I think he's still not over it. Well, I wanted to speak to him about a sharpening job on my last sword. It got pretty chipped in my last battle a couple months ago. But apparently he's not too happy with me. Nezuko admitted. Not that I can blame him. This is the third sword I've messed up with in the last several months. That has to be a record for something. No need to blame yourself, young lady, the chief countered. He's the one who made the faulty sword, it is no failing of yours that they break. Nezuko blinked several times before raising her hand with her index finger up. In his defense, I threw sword number 2 at an escaping demon. I think he was well within his rights to be ticked off with me in that case, she told him with a nervous smile. But if I can just talk to him, I'm sure we can sort things out. Once we find him, of course. I'm sorry. Find him? Is he not here? He's gone missing, the chief sighed. You're still recovering from injuries, yes? Yeah, I have a little more healing to do before I'm cleared for active duty. Nezuko answered. Why? If we can't find him before you recover, then we will assign you a new swordsmith, the chief told her while the swordsmiths at his sides tensed up. We'll find him as soon as possible, and apprehend him, one said, swinging his arm. Good, good, the chief replied. Please don't hurt him too badly. Nezuko sighed. And watch out for the knives, he strapped some to his head last time, and chased me up a tree. Of course, Lady Kamado, the other swordsmith replied. Now, feel free to explore the village whilst you stay, the chief said. We have plenty of facilities that may aid in your healing and recovery. Thank you, sir. Nezuko replied with a bow, standing up and letting her guide escort her out of the chief's home. I'll lead you to the hot spring. It can heal just about anything, he said as they walked. Thank you. Nezuko chuckled. Nezuko, a familiar voice squealed, bringing the teenager's attention to a familiar pink-haired woman running towards her. As soon as she spotted the pink and green braids, Nezuko lit up with a smile matching the love Hashira's. Mitsuri, she exclaimed, running up the path and hugging her big sister. It's so good to see you. You, too. I'm so glad you're awake. Mitsuri giggled, lifting Nezuko up and twirling around. Once she put Nezuko down, Mitsuri skipped around to Tanjiro's box. Hi, Tanjiro. It's good to see that you're okay, too, she whispered, getting faint scratching from within the box in response. Now that you're here, all my good vibes from my bath are back. What do you mean? Nezuko asked. Oh, someone ignored me back at the hot springs. Mitsuri sighed. I even asked his name, but he walked right past me without a response, she clarified with a pout before lighting up again. But now that you're here, and I got to see you, I feel much happier. You always have a way of brightening up my day, Nezuko. You, too, Mitsuri. Nezuko replied with a smile, hugging the love Hashira again. You should probably get to dinner. I hear they're serving rice with matsutake mushrooms. Mitsuri lit up at that. Really? She gasped. Oh, I can't wait, she squealed, stepping back from Nezuko. Enjoy the hot springs. We'll catch up at dinner, the love Hashira declared as she began skipping away. Nezuko smiled, then resumed her hike up to the hot springs. Once she was certain the sun had set enough, she let Tanjiro out of his box and the siblings made their way to the nearest pool. Oh, it's you, a familiar voice snarled. Nezuko peeked over the rocks to see a familiar mohawk. Good to see you, too, she greeted him with a sharp smile as she pulled out a spare ribbon and began tying her hair up. Still getting angry at little girls for following orders, she asked. Still breaking arms, he demanded in response. Nope. Only do that to bullies. Nezuko answered, about to continue when she spotted Tanjiro running up to the pool. Tanjiro, wait! Nezuko exclaimed before yelping in shock as Tanjiro flung his clothes off and jumped into the water. He resurfaced, and Nezuko turned to the other boy. I'm sorry about him, she mumbled before turning to Tanjiro. You couldn't have undressed as you entered the water, she asked quietly, getting no response as Tanjiro hummed contentedly while he floated in the water. It's no big deal, the scarred boy muttered. Nezuko sighed in relief, then began unbuttoning her jacket. What are you doing? Oh, sorry. Nezuko gasped, swiftly turning around. Once her jacket and haori were off, she removed her tabi socks and kaihan and stepped into the water. As she undressed, she slowly sank into the water. Only when she was submerged up to her shoulders did she turn around. Sorry, she said, not commenting on how the scarred boy was as red as a tomato. She also decided not to bring up how he seemed to look in every direction except hers. Whatever. Just remember not to strip all willy-nilly in front of people like that, the scarred boy grumbled. Yeah. I'm a lot more used to it just being either me and my family. Or at least another girl. Nezuko admitted sheepishly. Did your arm heal up okay? Yeah, once it was put back in place. You really messed it up, and it hurt like hell, the scarred boy answered with a glare, though his continued blush diminished the effect. You attacked that girl. And all because of your impatience. Nezuko deadpanned. Not to mention, she was one of the MSTR's daughters. Yeah, the scarred boy turned, and swung for the water. What the hell? Get away from me, you little, in the splash, Nezuko saw a familiar patch of red get shoved under the water. Tanjiro! Nezuko exclaimed, swatting the boy's arm away and pulling her brother's head out from under the water. What's your deal? The other boy snapped. Tanjiro responded with a huff before presenting something to the boy. Nezuko looked at the offering. Is that a tooth? Nezuko asked, looking from the tooth to the other boy, and noticing a gap in his grit teeth. Nezuko facepalmed, understanding the situation. Sorry about my brother, she sighed, settling back into the water. I think he found your tooth, and is trying to give it back. Probably as an offer of friendship. She turned to the boy, unsurprised by his expression that was a mix between confused and disgusted. He turned to Tanjiro, who was still holding out the tooth. Well, throw it out, you little freak, he yelled before wading to the edge of the hot springs. Do whatever you want. I'm leaving, he added, turning to glare at the siblings before storming out after grabbing his clothes. Tanjiro shrugged before flopping into his front and floating contentedly in the water. Nezuko watched him float with a mildly unimpressed stare. Please tell me you didn't think you two could be friends just because you were both in the NDE, she sighed, only getting happy humming in reply. Then again, I did kick Inosuke in his D before we became friends. Deciding not to focus too much on it, she leaned back and rested against the rocks. She was here to relax while she waited for her new sword, and she was going to relax. Now that I think about it, didn't Sumi say what that boy's name was? Oh, you mean that boy with the mohawk? His name is Shinazugawa Genya. Wait, Shinazugawa? Nezuko quickly straightened up, her eyes wide. Is that guy related to the Wind Hashira? She exclaimed. If his name really is Shinazugawa, that should make him the Wind Hashira's brother. But Shinazugawa always keeps insisting he has no brother. Mitsuri said when Nezuko asked about the two boys' relation. That's weird. Nezuko replied. They look scarily alike. They even have the same scar on their faces, she added, running her finger across where the two Shinazugawa boys' matching scar was. The one across their noses. Maybe they had a really bad falling out. Maybe. Mitsuri muttered with a pout, grabbing another bowl of rice. But still. My little siblings and I never had fights that went this far. Same here. Even when we did have an actual fight, either Tanjiro, myself, or our parents usually resolved it pretty quickly. Nezuko noted. Well, if you ask me, they're both pretty scary. Mitsuri admitted. I hope whatever came between them can get resolved. Tanjiro crawled out from under the table, then made his way to Mitsuri. What are you trying to say, Tanjiro? Mitsuri asked with a giggle before she began tickling Tanjiro. He flopped onto his back with muffled laughter, and Nezuko smiled warmly at the sight. Oh, I see. Mitsuri gasped as she kept tickling. I don't think I'll ever get used to seeing him like this. Nezuko sighed. Mitsuri turned to her with an inquisitive expression. Tanjiro was only a year and a half old when I was born, and Takeo was born 2 years later. Tanjiro and I don't have any particularly strong memories of being the babies of the family. So it's a little strange to see him, she gestured to Tanjiro, unsure of how to describe it. Like this. Well, he doesn't seem to mind being pampered a little. Mitsuri giggled, ruffling Tanjiro's ponytail. He's probably going to feel really embarrassed about it when he's human again. Nezuko mused. He hates being a burden to others, even if they say he wasn't, she added as Tanjiro nuzzled against Mitsuri. Nezuko hummed with a small smile before turning to Genya's place setting. It's weird that he never came to dinner, don't you think? I heard some swordsmiths say he never takes meals. Mitsuri replied with a worried look. Maybe we should take him some food? Nezuko suggested. I'm sure he has food of his own, if he's not coming for meals, but it won't hurt to make sure. You're right. Mitsuri giggled. Nezuko nodded, and the two girls got some food ready for Genya. There we go. Nezuko said with a smile, examining their handiwork. She picked up the tray, and the trio began walking to Genya's room. Can you keep a secret, Tanjiro? Mitsuri asked in a stage whisper. I think I might be hungry again. Mitsuri admitted. It's probably from smelling the onigiri. But don't tell anyone, okay? Nezuko disguised her giggle as a cough. It was nice to see Mitsuri being more comfortable discussing her eating habits. By the way, how are things going with you and Abanai? Nezuko asked. Mitsuri whirled around to face her, face flushed to the point the older girl looked like a strawberry. Have you had more meetings with your family? Nezuko asked excitedly. We did. Mitsuri squealed. I wanted to write to you about it, but you were still in a coma, and I was so excited that I didn't even know what to say. But my family absolutely adores him, and I couldn't be happier about it. That's amazing, Mitsuri. Nezuko exclaimed while Tanjiro hugged the older girl's legs with a series of excited hums. I know. And it went so well, too. Mitsuri replied. We're going to go see everyone again next week. I can't wait. Well, I'm glad it's working out. Nezuko told her. Sorry to interrupt, Lady Kanroji, the Kikushi behind Mitsuri piped up. Your sword is ready. Oh, thank you. Mitsuri replied before turning back to Nezuko. I'd better be going, she sighed as she picked up Tanjiro, getting a pout and a disappointed hum in response. I guess this is goodbye for now. Nezuko muttered, transferring the tray for Genya to one arm as she reached out for Tanjiro with the other. We'll do our best to live so we can see each other again, right? Mitsuri nodded. It's not guaranteed, but we can try. Mitsuri told her. And I know you want to get stronger. But don't forget, you and your friends defeated an upper-rank Kizuki. That's nothing to sneeze at. I'd say what you all did was equal to 5 or even 10 years of training. Thanks, Mitsuri. Nezuko replied. Mitsuri glanced to the Kikushi behind her, then leaned in close to Nezuko with her hand cupped to her mouth. And if you want extra training, there's supposed to be a secret weapon in this village to make you stronger. Try and find it. Mitsuri whispered before running to her SCRT. But bye. Stay safe, you too, she called out as the two women left. Bye. Nezuko replied while Tanjiro waved. Once Mitsuri vanished around the corner, Nezuko turned to Tanjiro. Let's go find Genya, she whispered. Tanjiro nodded with a hum, and the siblings continued walking down the hall. The next morning, after breakfast, Nezuko took a moment to meditate before setting off into the woods. A secret weapon, she whispered. I wonder if it's buried, she mused with a faint smile, turning to where Tanjiro's box rested on her back. It's like a treasure hunt. Or those games we played when we were younger. You remember? The ones where we'd go out into the woods and find funny-shaped rocks or sticks. Quiet scratching was the only response, but Nezuko smiled nonetheless. I'm not giving it to you, a new voice yelled. Nezuko turned in the direction it came from. That sounded like a kid. Nezuko muttered before taking off after the noise. No way, a boy yelled as Nezuko settled in the tree line. She glanced around, finding a familiar face staring indifferently at the yelling boy. Young Takedo is a prodigy. He became a Hashira in a mere 2 months. It's especially impressive when you consider he's your age. But that poor boy. He barely remembers us, even during meetings. My heart aches for whatever caused his amnesia. Missed Hashira, Takedo Muichiro. Nezuko recalled before catching her eye on another figure behind the boy. She leaned around the trees, trying to get a better look. She saw samurai armor over a red kimono. But what caught her eye most of all was the red hue of his hair, matching the color seen in her family for generations, and the Hanafuda earrings dangling from the figure's ears. Earrings that were an identical match to the heirlooms of her family. Who are you? Nezuko wondered. Just give me the key. Takedo said. No. This doll is my ancestor's, and it's precious to me, the boy shouted. If I give it to you, you're just gonna break it. So what, if I break it? Takedo asked. Make a new one. No. I'm not gonna. The boy was cut off by a harsh slap to his face, sending him tumbling to the ground. Nezuko straightened up with an appalled gasp, then briskly walked out of the trees. What do you think you're doing? She demanded as she stomped up to the missed Hashira, glaring daggers at him. How dare you hit that kid? Just because you're a Hashira, doesn't mean you get to trample all over everyone who's a lower rank than you. Takedo turned to her, looking exceedingly bored with her. Who are you? He asked. Right, he had amnesia. Who I am doesn't matter. Nezuko snapped, straightening up as much as possible and getting closer to Takedo. Not that straightening up did much to give her a height advantage, he still had a few centimeters on her. Still, less of a difference than the adults she'd confronted in the past. What matters is you hit this kid for defending something important to him. That's no way to act towards someone. Especially as a Hashira. I don't care how old you are. Apologize now. And why should I do that? Takedo inquired. He's acting immature. If I break the doll, he can make a new one. This is wasting my time, anyways. Do you not realize what it means to keep a Hashira from his duty, either? Actually, I do. Nezuko replied as she stepped back, though she didn't lose her withering glare. But if that's such a dire issue, why don't you stop wasting your own time? You can just as easily move along and stop bullying this kid. That's hardly a way to address your superiors. Takedo told her. Oh, I thought disrespect was the attitude of the hour. Nezuko snapped. I won't give you that key, the boy piped up. Not even if you torture me. Have you ever actually been subject to torture training? Takedo asked. Nezuko stepped so she was between him and the kid. You wouldn't last a second. Besides, all you're good for is making weapons. That isn't much, compared to the work we demon slayers do. They're no less vital than we are. Nezuko spat, clenching her fist to keep herself from lashing out and slapping the Miss Hashira. But one more insult, and all bets would be off, consequences be met. The swordsmiths are the only reason we can fight demons. Without them, we'd have no weapons, and we'd be crippled. I'm not in the mood for any speeches. Takedo replied, reaching towards Nezuko. She swatted the hand aside. I wasn't giving a speech, she muttered. Only stating facts. You think the swordsmiths are less valuable because they don't fight? You try making a sword, and then we'll talk. And you're so knowledgeable about bladesmithing? Takedo inquired. Well, neither are you. Nezuko retorted, tilting her head and crossing her arms. Takedo looked her up and down scrutinizingly, tilting his head in reply. What's in that box? He asked. I can sense there's something inside. Is it a demon? He added, reaching for the box on Nezuko's back. Nezuko grabbed onto his wrist, squeezing as a warning. Don't touch it, she growled, her glare intensifying at the Miss Hashira. I don't have time for this, he sighed before his other hand snapped up, right into Nezuko's neck. She blacked out. DMN pressure point. She's waking up. See ya, a familiar voice exclaimed before footsteps receded. Was that Haganezuka? Nezuko asked as she sat up. What? No, the boy from before exclaimed, turning away with his hands behind his head. Still, she felt the familiar knot of a lie in her chest. I know you're lying. Nezuko deadpanned before shaking her head. Not like it mattered, since Haganezuka had already run off again. Where's Takedo? At that, the boy deflated. I gave him the key, he admitted. Why'd he want that key so bad, anyways? Nezuko asked, noticing a nearby box. The lid of the box had writing on it, Mechanical Doll, Yorichi Type 0. It's for a mechanical doll, the boy answered. It's really special, for training. And it needs the key to make it move. But, now, the boy sniffled. Now it's gonna get broken. Well, why don't we go find Takedo and that doll? Nezuko offered as she got to her feet, offering her hand for the boy. He swatted her hand aside, and Nezuko tried not to let the nostalgia get to her. I'm not a little kid anymore, sis. I don't need to be babied. What's your name, by the way? Nezuko asked, forcing back the memories of Takeo for the time being. Kotetsu, the boy replied. Nice to meet you, Kotetsu. I'm Kamado Nezuko, she chuckled as they walked into the woods, following the sound of swords clashing. They came into another clearing to find Takedo battling the doll. 6 arms. Nezuko gasped, watching Takedo dodge and block the 6 swords with what looked like minimal effort. Yeah. Kotetsu said. You know, that doll is based on a real swordsman. My ancestor gave it 6 arms because otherwise, it couldn't match the swordsman's real-life speed. Really, a man can move that fast? Nezuko wondered aloud. And Takedo is actually standing his ground against it. He's really in a league of his own. Well, duh, a high-pitched voice replied from the ground, bringing the two's attention to the long-lashed crow at their feet. He is descended from sun-breathers, after all. He's on a whole other level from the likes of you, the crow giggled. Descended from a sun-breather? Nezuko asked, turning to Takedo. Weird. He looks nothing like what Shinjiro described a chosen wielder of sun-breathing to be. That's crazy. I guess it's no wonder he's such a prodigy, if he's descended from someone who used the first breath style. It's not easy to use. Don't you know it, the crow squawked. In fact, he's a direct descendant of the first sun-breather. At that, a knot formed in Nezuko's chest. But sir, didn't you say you were at a loss, because you have no heirs of your own? But the first sun-breather didn't have any descendants. Nezuko muttered unconsciously, yelping when a beak latched onto her cheek. The crow pinched her for a moment longer before releasing the skin in its beak. Nezuko rubbed the sore spot as the crow perched on her shoulder. "What would you know?" the crow demanded. "That boy is living proof that the first son breeder had descendants." "Are you saying that's a lie? How would you know something from the Sengoku PRD, ya brat?" "Wait, Sengoku?" Nezuko exclaimed, turning back to the mechanical doll with wide eyes. "That dream I had is making less sense the more I learn about it." "What dream?" Kotetsu asked. "This is going to sound like I'm insane, but I had a dream the other night." Nezuko told him. "And in that dream, I saw the swordsman that doll is based on. It felt so real, too, like I was actually there. There was this other guy, too, who the swordsman was talking to. Maybe it's an inherited memory." Kotetsu replied. What, now?" Nezuko asked, squinting skeptically at Kotetsu. "An inherited memory. We talk about them in the village. They say that your physical form isn't the only thing passed down by your ancestors. Memories can be, too." Kotetsu explained. "So what you saw in your dream was probably your ancestor's memory. I guess that makes sense." Nezuko thought, absent-mindedly rubbing her sore cheek. The differences in her home, the different yet familiar Haori Sumiyoshi wore, the swordsman wearing her family's earrings and speaking to Sumiyoshi. Everything about that dream seemed to make more sense if it was Sumiyoshi's memory from the Sengoku PRD. A clang snapped her out of the train of thought, bringing her attention to the doll as Takedo got more aggressive. Kotetsu took off running. "Kotetsu, wait!" Nezuko exclaimed, chasing after him. After a few minutes of searching, she found him in a tree. "Do all swordsmiths have a penchant for climbing trees, or is it just you and Haganezuka?" Nezuko muttered, mostly to herself, as she began her own climb. "It's all gonna end with me." Kotetsu mumbled, sounding like he was in tears. He hadn't even noticed Nezuko hanging from a branch right next to him. "No, it's not," she piped up. Kotetsu yelped in surprise, and Nezuko grabbed his arm to keep him from falling. "Are you gonna stop saying bad things about yourself, or do I need to open the box and let the contents flick your exposed chin?" Nezuko asked with a smirk. "What?" Kotetsu replied. "You shouldn't talk about yourself like that." Nezuko told him. "And it's not like you're alone. I may not have a lot of experience with mechanical dolls, but I'm good at fixing things." "But I'm not." Kotetsu protested, turning his gaze downward. Nezuko rolled her eyes, swinging around so Tanjiro's box was facing Kotetsu. "I'm not good with swords, and I'm not good with dolls. I'm useless." The box creaked open, getting the boy's attention. "What the?" Kotetsu trailed off before Nezuko heard the sound of a flick hitting skin. "Ouchie." "Thanks, Tanjiro." Nezuko whispered as she turned to face Kotetsu again, hoisting herself up so she was sitting on the branch to give her arms a break. "That's enough beating yourself up, Kotetsu. You're, what, 8? 10. Kotetsu snapped. 10, got it." Nezuko replied with a snap. "Same age Takeo was. Doesn't matter. My point is, you're still a kid. And skills take time to develop, even if you're learning them from a young age. I didn't learn to sew as well as I did overnight, and I definitely didn't pick up swordsmanship in a single night," she told him, her gaze drifting to her calloused hands. She'd always had small calluses on her fingertips, most of them from sowing or harvesting plants. The ones on her palms came from her demon slayer training, especially the days where she trained until her hands were bleeding from the amount of time she spent holding and swinging a katana. "But. No buts, except yours getting back on the ground and getting to that doll," Nezuko said firmly. "You can do this, Kotetsu. Even if you can just keep that doll functioning for another decade or two. If you don't manage to fix it, one of your descendants might," she added. The weight of the box on her back suddenly felt heavier, even though she knew Tanjiro was still in his toddler form. You have to believe that, okay? Like I have to believe in my goals. What do you mean? Kotetsu asked. Is it about that demon in your box? Yeah. Nezuko sighed. He's my big brother. And, obviously, he got turned into a demon. But I'm trying to turn him back into a human. It might take years, decades even. I may not even live to see it, but even if I die before a cure is made, I have to have faith that someone will carry out my will. That someone will turn Tanjiro back into a human, that somebody will defeat Kibutsuji. She reached out, grabbing Kotetsu's hand. So let's do this, okay? Kotetsu nodded, and the two got back on solid ground before walking to where Takedo had been fighting the doll. There you are, the Hashira in question said once they crossed paths with him. My sword broke while I was training, so I'll be taking this one for the time being, he stated, holding up the broken arm holding the sword in question. You broke an arm off of that doll? Nezuko exclaimed while Kotetsu took off. Kotetsu. Nezuko called out before something smacked her in the head. She caught it, turning to see a scabbard. Dispose of that for me, will you? Takedo requested. What am I, a maid? Nezuko asked herself, glaring daggers at Takedo's back. His crow, perched on his shoulder, turned to face Nezuko with a haughty squawk. Nezuko's glare intensified at the bird before she flipped it off, running after Kotetsu before the crow complained to Takedo. It's broken. Kotetsu cried while Nezuko knelt beside him. Well, we'll just have to put it back together as best we can. Nezuko replied, playfully punching Kotetsu's shoulder with a gentle smile. Let's get started. The two worked on the doll for hours, searching for any misaligned gears and other problems that could prevent it from running. It was raining when they finally finished putting the doll back together as best they could. You ready? Nezuko asked, holding up the key. No time like the present. Kotetsu replied. Nezuko nodded, inserting the key into its slot and stepping back once she turned it. With rattling of gears, the doll sprang to life. What do we do now? Nezuko asked as the doll raised its 5 remaining arms. It seemed to focus on her, and Nezuko itched for a sword. Train! Kotetsu declared. What? Nezuko yelped before she had to duck under one of the blades. As she dodged, she couldn't help but marvel at the doll's speed. For its age, it moved faster than Nezuko had ever seen anything move before. And that was impressive, considering how fast Yuzui had moved against Jutaro in the entertainment district. Come on. You gotta land a hit on it. Kotetsu yelled as Nezuko leapt away from the doll. I don't know if you noticed, kid, but I'm kind of lacking in the weapons department, she snapped, barely dodging another blow. So unless you got a spare sword nearby, I'm not getting anywhere within striking range of this thing. She leapt above a swing for her ankle, flipping over the doll and kicking for its legs, of my own free will. The doll dodged the kick and turned to her. As it raised the blades, Nezuko used a back handspring to get away and back on her feet. And, so it seemed, she was now fighting for her life against the Yorichi Type 0. With the revival of the doll, absolute hell began. Kotetsu called the doll Yorichi Type 0, as it was called on the box. Nezuko called it the stuff of nightmares, and called Kotetsu a menace to society. Not that she said either of those out loud, mostly due to being constantly attacked, but she was allowed to think her thoughts as she pleased. Thankfully, she'd been given a blade, so she could actually block the Dmed thing without the risk of getting her arms sliced off. Plus, Kotetsu had replaced the swords with clubs, so the hits would leave bruises instead of possibly slicing her in two. Those arms were no joke, though. She could barely keep up with the mechanical doll. Eventually, Kotetsu began withholding basic essentials. He refused to let Nezuko have food or water, aside from the scarce rain on Mount Yoko, until she managed to hit the doll. Little tyrant. And despite his best efforts, Tanjiro's interventions never lasted long. And Nezuko attempted to get away on her own. Suffice it to say, the Yorichi Type 0 was both fast and determined to beat her to a pulp. Whoever built it? Far ahead of their time. Are you trying to kill me? Nezuko asked, blocking and dodging strikes. She had ditched her haori and jacket to keep herself from overheating, the dehydration doing her no favors. At least her undershirt was light. 6 arms is too many. You'll be fine. Kotetsu countered. And it's only got 5, now, thanks to that indifferent JRK. Nezuko barely held back a growl at the kid's insistence she wouldn't die. And with how you're fighting, it's a good thing I suched out those swords. If I hadn't, you'd be been dead on day 1. Easy for you to say. Nezuko thought, only holding back on glaring to avoid getting smacked around like a ragdoll by an actual doll. Kotetsu wasn't the one who hadn't eaten or gotten a proper drink of water in days. But, as much as she hated to admit it, she couldn't deny that this training would be very helpful in improving her reflexes. Assuming she didn't drop dead from her basic needs not being met, of course. Several days later, Nezuko knew she was on death's doorstep. Another hour of this, and starvation would surely kill her. That was assuming the Yorichi Type 0 didn't kill her first, now that Kotetsu had armed it with actual swords. I can barely keep up with this thing. At this rate, I'm never going to land a hit. I'm not gonna make it. She thought as she clumsily blocked another strike, moving to dodge when she saw something. A faint outline that looked like left side of the head, neck, right side, left side, right thigh, right shoulder. More outlines formed, but the first one remained the clearest. The one with a sword aimed for the left side of her head. I wonder. Nezuko dodged to the right as the blade stabbed where her head had been, twisting to avoid the strike for her neck as the first outline faded and another became clearer. Are my instincts guiding me? She jumped away from the slice for her right, then blocked the blow aimed for her left. With another jump, she avoided the cuts headed for her thigh and shoulder. Then she went on the offensive, nicking the doll and causing it to recoil. Not bad. Kotetsu cheered. I'll get you some water. Maybe a snack, while you're at it. Even some dango or onigiri won't hurt. Nezuko told him as he sped off, collapsing onto her back seconds later. Staring at the sky allowed her to think about what had allowed her to land that hit. Had she honed her instincts to an even sharper ability than before, able to detect more than just the opening thread? Had her proximity to death caused the new ability to manifest? Either way, something had changed, and possibly even given her a new edge in the field. I gotta make sure to hone, whatever this is. Kotetsu came back with a pack of fresh onigiri, which Nezuko barely kept herself from devouring in one bite. She couldn't help crying as she ate, declaring how tasty the food was with each bite. Whether it was her mentors rubbing off in her, or just a reaction to food after days of starvation, she didn't know. Nor did she care, given she could finally eat again. Now that she was no longer actively dying, Nezuko found fighting the mechanical doll much easier. She had her stamina back, and the outlines continued to guide her. She quickly noticed that outright avoiding the mysterious guides altogether just changed them, that she had to dodge or block one at a time. Maybe two, if she moved right. But that was easy enough, now that she knew where the hits were aimed. She crossed blades with the doll, pushing against 3 of the 5 arms. Left waist. Nezuko threw her legs forward, using the momentum to skid under the doll and cause all 5 swords to stab the ground. She followed up with a kick to the doll's leg, causing it to stumble slightly. Nice job, Miss Nezuko. Kotetsu cheered. Nezuko smiled slightly as she leapt into the air, flipping around and swinging for the doll. Don't hold back, okay? If it breaks, I'll fix it. Kotetsu yelled. Wasn't. Nezuko twisted around, her practice sword striking the doll's face. Planning on it, she declared. The sword snapped, but the doll stopped moving. Nezuko landed harshly on her back, and she barely held back a few choice words as she recovered from the landing. If you need to curse, go ahead. Kotetsu told her. I've heard plenty, even if the adults think not. Nezuko continued to hold her tongue out of habit. She could release all the vulgar language in the privacy of her room. She slowly rolled onto her knees, looking at the doll and spotting its cracked face. More so than before. Who? I did it, she exclaimed, raising her fists in the air. You did great. Kotetsu replied as he knelt beside Nezuko. Never withhold my food again, you hear me? Nezuko told him before a cracking noise startled them both. They turned to the doll as it dropped to its knees. Its head cracked, the two sides falling to the ground and revealing something inside. What the hell just happened? Nezuko yelled. It's a sword. Kotetsu gasped. But it's gotta be as old as this doll. You really think it's been there the whole time? Nezuko wondered, unable to pry her eyes off the sword. It was hardly impressive, and its age showed, but... She couldn't explain it, but she almost felt like the sword was calling out to her. Wait! Kotetsu exclaimed, reclaiming her attention. Miss Nezuko, you came here for a sword, right? Maybe this sword is meant for you. After all, we found it because of you. Oh, no, I couldn't. Nezuko protested. It's your doll. Doesn't that mean it's your property? Besides, I'm sure that me being the one to break it was just a coincidence. This doll is ancient, it probably fell apart from its old age. Why don't we just take a peek? Kotetsu suggested. Nezuko bit her lip as she turned to the sword again, then she turned back to Kotetsu. Okay, just a peek, she relented. The two carefully pulled the scabbard out of the doll, then carefully unsheathed the sword. It's rusted. Nezuko sighed, trying to keep her disappointment from being too obvious. I'm sorry, Miss Nezuko. Kotetsu mumbled. It's not your fault. Nezuko assured him, jumping at the heavy footsteps approaching. She and Kotetsu turned to the trees as a hulking figure emerged. One wearing a familiar Hayatoko mask. Mr. Haganezuka? Since when have you been this muscular? No need to worry, leave it to me. Haganezuka replied as he grabbed onto the sword. What do you mean? Kotetsu demanded, pulling against Haganezuka's attempt to take the sword. Leave it to me. Haganezuka yelled. Leave what to you? Nezuko asked. Just leave it to me. Haganezuka responded, still refusing to elaborate. The tug-of-war continued until Kanamori arrived behind Haganezuka. Watch and learn, children, the calmer swordsmith told them, crouching behind Haganezuka. Mr. Haganezuka's weak spots are his sides. Like so. He tickled Haganezuka, causing the man to collapse and release the sword. My apologies, Lady Kamado, young Kotetsu. It's all right, Mr. Kanamori. Nezuko replied while Kotetsu began flicking rocks at the unconscious Haganezuka. So, has he been hiding out in the woods this whole time? Yes. Mr. Haganezuka has been training intensely to forge you a new sword. One better than any of the previous blades. Kanamori answered. But in his letters, he sounded like he wanted nothing to do with me. Nezuko noted. She could. Still. Feel the seething rage in those letters. Yes. Mr. Haganezuka can often be an odd one. Especially when expressing gratitude. Kanamori chuckled. You see, he's been working so hard because you've been such a loyal customer. Most slayers he's been assigned to have requested other swordsmiths because of his eccentric personality. But you haven't. For that, he is quite grateful. Oh. Nezuko replied. No wonder he hasn't found himself a bride. Kotetsu grumbled before Haganazuka sprang upright. Oh, look. He's been revived. Kanamori said. Care to explain what you meant earlier? Nezuko asked. Allow me to take that ancient sword. I will restore it, using the ancient techniques of the Haganazuka clan. Haganazuka answered, taking the scabbard and handing another to Nezuko. In the meantime, take this sword. It should suffice until the ancient sword is restored. Nezuko accepted the new scabbard, unsheathing the sword. She quickly noticed the guard was different, a black wool style instead of her usual flame guard. I had to give it a different guard. The one usually on your blades was not sent to me, and I expected it, but I'm sure this new guard will still work. Thank you. Nezuko replied. I actually brought my old guard with me. If it won't go onto this sword, then I'd like to attach it to the ancient sword after it's restored. Very well. Haganazuka said. Nezuko pulled out her original guard, and passed it to Kotetsu. Keep this safe, okay? You can count on me, Miss Nezuko. Kotetsu declared as he placed the guard in his outer robe. Nezuko nodded with a grateful smile, then turned to the two swordsmiths. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to get some rest and a proper meal, she sighed before leaving the clearing. The last thing she wanted was for Kotetsu to reactivate the doll and drag her into more death battles with it. And that's that. Haganazuka said not to bug him while he's restoring the sword. It's gonna take him 3 days, so I'm just sitting here while he works. Nezuko said. Humph. Nezuko chuckled as Tanjiro flopped onto his back at her side. Yeah, we're having a little vacation, she whispered with a smile. I just hope Haganazuka will be alright. They said the honing technique could kill most people. Tanjiro placed his hand on Nezuko's arm. She smiled in response before her gaze drifted across the table. He didn't show up again. Nezuko muttered, staring at the empty place setting. Nezuko turned to Tanjiro to see him pointing to the food. You want to try taking some food to him again? Nezuko guessed, taking another bite of her rice. Tanjiro nodded. Alright. We can take some to him after I finish my dinner, she chuckled. Once she had eaten her fill, Nezuko and Tanjiro packed up some of the leftovers and made their way to where Genya was staying. She hoped it was enough. She didn't really have the best scope for what a boy of Genya's size and physique would need to eat, with both her and Tanjiro being quite a bit smaller than Genya themselves. The siblings came up to the door, and Nezuko knocked. What? Shinazugawa. Nezuko replied. Sorry for intruding, but we brought you some food. You haven't shown up to dinner at all since we've been here, and I was starting to worry about you. Not hungry. Genya grumbled. Oh. You brought some food with you, then? Nezuko asked before the door slammed open with much more force than necessary. Hey, be careful. You're going to break that. Nezuko exclaimed as she lifted her gaze to meet Genya's. Though he was still flushed, he wasn't nearly as red as he was in the hot spring. What do you care about what I'm doing and eating? He snapped. I noticed you weren't showing up to any meals, what was I supposed to think? Nezuko retorted incredulously. Forgive me for being worried about a fellow demon slayer's health. You dislocated my shoulder. Genya yelled. You attacked a child without provocation. Nezuko countered. Whatever Genya was about to say died on his tongue as Tanjiro let himself into the room. What the hell, you little freak? Genya shouted, stomping over to Tanjiro. You can't just walk into people's rooms. He reached for Tanjiro, stopping dead in his tracks when Tanjiro raised his hand. Why do you still have that? Have what? Nezuko asked, approaching the boys to see the tooth in her brother's hand. She sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Tanjiro. We've talked about this. No collecting weird stuff from people, even if you mean to return it to them. Especially teeth. Does he do this regularly? Genya asked, whipping around to Nezuko while Tanjiro continued to present the tooth to him. He means well, I promise. Nezuko sighed. He just has a weird habit of collecting random stuff from people when he finds it on the ground. It's honestly a coin toss on whether he keeps it as a memento, or tries to return it as an offer of friendship. Genya turned to Tanjiro, then to Nezuko, going back and forth for a few seconds. Your brother's a lunatic, you know that, he deadpanned. Trust me. I'm aware. Nezuko replied. She had come across Tanjiro's various collections many times. She still hadn't found that hair ribbon he nabbed, come to think of it. Honestly, I've given up on questioning it, at this point. Get lost and die. Genya yelled before kicking the siblings out of his room. Tanjiro huffed indignantly while Nezuko got back on her feet. So, what did we learn? Nezuko asked. Tanjiro turned to her with a confused head tilt, and she sighed exasperatedly. Don't give people teeth, even if it's theirs, unless they ask for it, she whispered before scooping Tanjiro up and making her way back to their room. MMPH. MMPH. Tanjiro tugged on Nezuko's hair insistently, and she lowered her gaze to meet his eyes. Once he had her attention, Tanjiro pulled down the muzzle and pointed to his teeth. Once he pulled the bamboo back up, he pulled out Genya's tooth. What are you saying? Nezuko inquired. Tanjiro practically shoved the tooth in her face with an insistent grumble, then pointed in the direction of Genya's room. No, we aren't giving Genya his tooth. Nezuko sighed, continuing the walk to their room. MMPH. Tanjiro shook his head, holding the tooth just above his mouth then lowering it. Are you saying Genya has all his teeth now? Nezuko asked, getting an excited nod in reply. But how? He couldn't have grown it back, right? Tanjiro only shrugged, and Nezuko continued her walk. Now I'm curious. But I'll let him cool down before asking about that. Nezuko thought before a faint chill crawled up her spine, the sensation stopping her in her tracks. She looked around, but found nothing. With a shake of her head, she continued on her way. Tanjiro's grip on her jacket tightened, but she decided not to comment on it. Humph. MMPH. Nezuko looked up from her origami to see Tanjiro crouching behind her. What are you doing, Tanjiro? Nezuko asked before her brother's hands turned her head so she was facing forward. Once Tanjiro let go of her head, he began combing through her hair with his fingers. Mind the claws. Nezuko whispered, getting a slightly distracted hum in reply before Tanjiro pulled a small section of her hair away from the rest. Nezuko couldn't help smiling as Tanjiro tried to do her hair. Tanjiro sat in front of her with a disappointed pout. Nezuko reached into her hair, quickly understanding why her brother was so upset. She guessed Tanjiro had meant to do a French braid. But whatever happened left her hair in a mess, to put it simply. Tell you what, she told him as she began the probably arduous process of unknotting Tanjiro's attempt at a braid. Next time we see Mitsuri, I'll ask her to teach you how to do her braids. Does that sound nice? And maybe she'll have some other suggestions on hairstyles we can try. Tanjiro lit up at that, hugging Nezuko with a happy hum. Do you know the swordsmith by the name of Kanamori? The Kamado siblings turned to the newcomer, being faced with Takedo. Why are you asking for him? Nezuko asked, raising a brow. He's been assigned as my new swordsmith. I need to speak with him about my new sword. Takedo answered, his gaze drifting to Tanjiro. Well, I should hope you have an apology for Kotetsu. Nezuko replied. You hurt him, and damaged his family's doll. What are you talking about? Takedo asked, tilting his head without pulling his gaze from Tanjiro, who responded by mirroring the action. Wow, that amnesia must be bad. Nezuko thought. We had an argument. About a week ago. Kotetsu was involved, too. Because of the training doll that you wanted to use. Takedo only hummed, tilting his head to the other side. Again, Tanjiro mirrored him. Takedo can be a little prickly. But I think, underneath it all, is a very kind soul. He just forgot about it, maybe. Mitsuri's voice echoed. Maybe biting back can seem like the right course, but try not to be too hard on him. Did Mitsuri ever actually say that, or am I just imagining the advice she gave me? Nezuko wondered as she watched Takedo and Tanjiro continue to mirror each other. Well, I guess it won't kill anyone to be nice to him. And I got nothing to lose from it. Sometimes, Mitsuri had the better advice. He's in the forest with my swordsmith, Haganezuka. I could probably take you to him. It'll save a lot of time if you know exactly where to look, instead of wandering the woods trying to find him. Takedo's gaze flicked to Nezuko. Why would you take the time to help me? He asked. If what you said was true, then you probably dislike me. I'm not doing much, anyways. Haganezuka's handling a new sword for me. Nezuko replied with a shrug. So it's not much of a big deal. And I'm willing to put our last meeting behind us. He's an amnesiac kid, it's probably not great to hold too much of a grudge. And you're not expecting anything in return? Nope. Not how I was raised. Nezuko said. Besides, helping others tends to have a way of coming back around to help you in return. She added, turning to Tanjiro. Isn't that right? She asked with a smile, ruffling Tanjiro's hair and getting muffled laughter in reply. Huh? She turned to Takedo. Something felt different about him. His newly widened eyes seemed brighter. What was that thing you just said? What, specifically? Nezuko asked. That thing about helping people. Takedo answered while his gaze drifted to Tanjiro again. Who is this boy? My older brother. You met him at that trial? Nezuko replied. How the heck is his amnesia this bad? Older, brother? Takedo muttered, his wide eyes glazing over slightly. Takedo? Hey, Takedo. You with us? Nezuko asked, kneeling in front of the Mist Hashira and waving her hand in front of his face. Yui, he mumbled before shaking his head and turning to Nezuko with his usual indifferent expression and dull eyes. Why are you standing so close? He asked, prompting Nezuko to take a few steps back to her spot beside Tanjiro. You kinda zoned out on us. Nezuko admitted. I wanted to be sure you were okay. I see. Takedo replied. Well, I feel just fine, so there's no need to. The door slowly opened behind him, calling for the attention of the room's 3 occupants. Is someone else here? Nezuko wondered aloud, startling as Tanjiro began growling. Tanjiro. Not nice. What if it's a swordsmith, or, Nezuko trailed off as a familiar chill raced up her spine, turning back to the door. They watched as a whimpering figure crawled into the room, tears spilling from his eyes. Tanjiro snarled as his pupils narrowed into slits, growing to his normal size. Demon. Nezuko gasped as the figure revealed the horns and a large bump on his forehead. Takedo responded in an instant, unsheathing his sword. Mist breathing, 4th form. He muttered as he launched himself at the demon. Shifting flow slash. However, he only cut through the air. Ouch! The demon cried from his new spot on the ceiling. Please stop tormenting me. It hurts. That's no ordinary demon. Nezuko thought, unsheathing her own blade. No ordinary demon could dodge a Hashira. This is one of the 12 Kazuki. She took a breath, raising the sword as fire danced across the black metal. Hinakami Kagura, sunflower move. The demon dodged her stab attack, landing on the floor. Please. Have mercy. He wailed. Tanjiro growled as he began to grow, familiar marks appearing across his body. Tanjiro. Nezuko exclaimed as her brother slammed his head into the other demons. Unsurprisingly, the demon's skull caved in as he collapsed on the ground. Nezuko turned her focus back to Tanjiro. "Be careful, Tanjiro. Your demon form," Nezuko told her brother. She really didn't want a repeat of Yoshiwara. Humph. Tanjiro nodded as the horn emerged from his original mark, turning back to the other demon just as Takedo sliced its head off. "How did a demon find this place?" Takedo asked as the demon's head rolled away. "It's not disintegrating," Nezuko muttered, turning to Tanjiro. He hadn't dropped the defensive stance. She turned back to the demon, jumping as the body grew a new head and the head grew a new body. Takedo rushed the demons, and one raised the fan it was holding. The gust of wind blasted the wall to pieces and sent the mist Hashira flying into the woods. Nezuko only managed to stay in the building thanks to Tanjiro grabbing onto her and the wall before either of them went flying. "Takedo!" Nezuko screamed before turning back to the demons. "Wow! It's been a while since we've been split off so fast." The head with a new body laughed. "Right, Sekido?" it asked, lifting its head to reveal green eyes and a fanged smirk. "Upper 4. Nezuko thought. She was really starting to question some higher power's sense of humor. How many Kizuki had she run into now? DMN it, what did I do in my last life? She asked herself as she raised her sword. I come here for a new sword, maybe to enjoy the bonus of a place where demons aren't here to try and kill me, and then this guy shows up. What do I have to do to get a real break? Quiet, Kuraku. The body with a new head, the one called Sekido, spat. The new head had red eyes with the same kanji as the green-eyed head, features seeming set into a perpetual scowl. This demon is like the swamp demon. It can split into multiples. But the swamp demon didn't cause nearly this many problems, and decapitating the copies worked on them, so how do we kill this one? Nezuko thought, turning to Tanjiro. Despite being in his full form, he hadn't lashed out. He hadn't even gotten as violent as he had with Upper 6. He's still in control of himself. Nezuko thought before laughter brought her attention back to the other demons in the room. Looks like we have that traitor, too. The one we gotta bring in alive. Kuraku laughed. But not necessarily in one piece. This is gonna be fun. How do you think we should immobilize him, Sekido? Focus, Kuraku. Sekido spat. We need to kill these demon slayers first. Especially that infernal brat. With the Hanafuda earrings. Once they're dead, we can take the demon to pay for his treachery. Tanjiro snarled in response. Yeah, good luck. Nezuko retorted. Shut it, demon slayer. Sekido snarled, raising his staff. Static raced along Nezuko's limbs before it even touched the remains of the floor. Electricity crackled across the ground, directly to the siblings. Nezuko screamed as the lightning struck her, scorching pain racing across her spasming limbs. If this kept up, she would black out. Her eyes drifted to the roof, finding a silhouette standing there. The demons hadn't seen it. Seen him. Genya. Nezuko thought before an explosive blast echoed through the air. The electricity stopped, allowing Nezuko and Tanjiro to catch their breaths. Nezuko turned to Genya to see he was holding a smoking weapon, aimed directly at Sekido's headless neck. Is that a shotgun? Nezuko asked herself before Genya leapt down with a sword drawn. Wow! Kuraku cackled. What kind of attack was that? I've never been hit with one like it before. Shinazugawa, wait. You can't cut their heads off. Nezuko yelled as Genya attacked. Too late. Their problems doubled yet again. What the hell? Genya snapped as two new demons were created. Decapitating them doesn't work. It just adds to the problem. Nezuko told him. Well, what did you expect me to do? He yelled. Nezuko racked her brain for an answer. Every demon has a head, even if it is hidden. Kyojiru's voice echoed. And if removing its head does not kill it, then you're decapitating the wrong body. Any demon that can split itself into more has a main body. Decapitate that, and the demon will die. We aren't decapitating the main body, she exclaimed. We have to. She was cut off by her own scream as a bird-like clone grabbed onto her leg and took off. This makes my heart sing, the demon declared. It's been so long since I was last split off. Tanjiro lunged to grab her, barely missing her hand. Tanjiro. Stay and help Genya. Nezuko told him, only to watch in horror as her fellow demon slayer was impaled by the blue-eyed clone's spear. Don't worry about me. Help Genya with the other three. Nezuko then turned to the clone holding her leg, the yellow-eyed one. She brought her other knee to her chest, then slammed her foot into the bird foot. Oh, so you want to play a game, he laughed as he turned to Nezuko. A chill raced up her spine and an ache pierced her skull as her captor took a deep breath in. As he finished the inhale, he released a deafening screech. Nezuko cried out, swinging her sword and slicing off the leg holding her. Not good. I didn't think this through. She realized upon seeing just how high up she had been taken. She had to break her fall, or she would injure or even kill herself with the impact. Nezuko reached out for the nearest tree branch, managing to stop her fall. Unfortunately, it didn't last long before it snapped, and she fell again. This time, her leg slammed into a tree before she finally hit the ground. Nezuko hissed from the pain as she went into recovery breathing, focusing on her leg. Blood vessels were ruptured, but no bones were broken. She'd just have some bruising, then. She silently thanked the gods that she had been given such durable legs. Something grabbed onto her ankle, and Nezuko turned to see the severed leg had grown a new head. And it was preparing another screech attack. Oh, give it a rest. Nezuko screamed, slamming her free leg down onto the demon's head with as much force as she could muster without hurting herself. This demon wanted a fight. It was getting a fight before it got sent to hell. He had to get to the village. That was all that was on Muichiro's mind as he ran through the forest he had landed in. However, his focus was broken by screaming. He turned to the noise, finding a strange fish creature attacking a young boy as the child haphazardly swung a sword at the obviously demonic thing. A child. He doesn't take priority. I should. His mind blanked for a moment, and he saw Rengoku's Tsuguko and her demon brother. Helping others tends to have a way of coming back around to help you in return. Muichiro skidded to a halt. Why were those words so familiar? He glanced at the boy for another brief moment, then ran towards the creature and child. He slashed at the demonic beast, decapitating it and getting between it and the boy. Mr. Takedo, the boy gasped. Run. Muichiro told him, raising his sword as the flesh where the head had been began to warp and swell. Run, before you get in my way. The creature regrew its head with a warbling shriek. A product of a blood demon art, then. Muichiro's gaze drifted upwards, towards the pot on its head. It used pots, and had a bunch of different attacks from each one. Shinazugawa told the other Hashira. There's probably a pattern, but I didn't take the time to figure it out. Right. Muichiro thought as he leapt toward the creature. Shinazugawa said there were pots. This must be that same demon. What rank did he say it was again? He slashed the pot, and the monster crumbled to ashes. He racked his brain to remember which 12 Kazuki Shinazugawa encountered, but the number just couldn't seem to come to mind. Thank you, the boy wailed. Muichiro recognized him. The kid taking care of that training doll. The one that refused to give him the key. He was the one Kamado mentioned earlier, wasn't he? The one she wanted Muichiro to apologize to. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I called you all those names. Thank you, Mr. Takedo, the kid cried as he climbed Muichiro. You called me names? Muichiro asked. Was it to my face or behind my back? Oh, well. He had to focus on finding the demon responsible for that blood demon art. If it was the same one Shinazugawa had faced, there could be a lot of trouble in store for everyone. He could apologize to the kid once the village was safe, assuming he remembered and survived until then. Come on. We have to help Mr. Kanamori and Mr. Haganazuka, the boy told him, pointing to the trees. Kanamori. He was supposed to be Muichiro's new swordsmith. It would certainly be wise to help him. Muichiro picked up the kid, and took off in the direction he had pointed in. After the bird demon flew out of reach with Nezuko, Tanjiro turned to the green demon with a warning growl. Nezuko said to help Genya. He would do that, and then find her. Hopefully, the yellow bird demon didn't kill her before he got there. For now, he had to focus on the three demons still here. He lunged forward, swiping at the green demon. However, it seemed to vanish before he could even graze it. Tanjiro whirled around with a snarl, intending to at least get one hit in. Where is it? Nice try, little guy, the green demon cackled before it grabbed onto his wrists. Tanjiro struggled against the green demon's grip, but couldn't quite dislodge its hold. Come on. You can do it, the green demon laughed as Tanjiro tried to lunge, only for the other demon's grip to hold him back. Just one more push. Immobilize him, Karaku. Stop wasting time, you idiot, the red demon snapped while the blue one turned to the commotion. Karaku, I will handle the demon boy, the blue one added. It doesn't matter who deals with him, the red demon snarled. Izetsu, focus on that demon slayer. Yurogi took the girl. Once we deal with the slayers, the traitor will be brought before our lord to pay for his treachery. Tanjiro stalled. Was that why the other demons kept trying to grab him? Well, Tanjiro supposed. He needed to fight his way out of this one way or another. No way was he going to him. Not without a fight. I'm working on it, the blue one replied. You're always so cruel to me, Sekido. Is this all you got, you little runt? The green one asked. Tanjiro snarled in reply, gasping as the demon kicked him, the demon's leg going all the way through his body and emerging from his back. Tanjiro winced at the limb piercing his body. How? The blue demon gasped at something. Lightning crackled through the air, followed by the loud bang of Nezuko's friend's gun. Wasn't he stabbed in the gut? Looks like I might have to join you, the green demon exclaimed. You're having way more fun with that guy, it added before turning to Tanjiro. Sorry, little fella, looks like we're done here, it hissed with a smile before crushing Tanjiro's wrist. You can do this. Tanjiro thought, biting into the muzzle to keep himself from crying out in pain. As much as he was used to regenerating now, it was usually whole limbs, not broken bones. He turned his gaze to the demon, glaring at it. He yanked his arms down, bringing the green demon's arms down with his own, then lunged for its face. His headbutt landed square on the green demon's nose, caving its face in and ripping its upper and lower jaw apart. He also heard the crack of its knee dislocating. Tanjiro used the time the demon needed to regenerate to yank his arm back. He ripped the limb off, spraying his blood on the demon before he regrew his arm and grabbed the arm holding the fan. He activated his blood demon art, keeping his foot pressed against the other demon's chest. He yanked with all his might, ripping the arm off with ease. What the demon got cut off as the blood sprayed across its face ignited, scorching its skin. Tanjiro leapt back, trying not to squirm at the sensation of the demon's leg being pulled out of his torso and spine. The demon continued to burn as Tanjiro healed himself, raising the arm he had ripped off. He extinguished the inferno just as he swung down, the wind sending the green demon flying. He turned to the blue demon, ready to deal with it. The faster he dealt with these three, the faster he could go and find Nezuko. You brat. Tanjiro whipped around to the red demon, and prepared to unleash another gust. Or maybe he could just beat the guy up with its fellow demon's arm. Before he could do anything, however, the red demon jabbed its staff into his neck. Tanjiro grabbed onto the staff just as it began making lightning, sending the electricity through Tanjiro's body. Blinding pain raced through every nerve and muscle in his body, leaving him unable to move. However, despite the pain, he could tell Nezuko's scent was approaching. As soon as the yellow demon's head-leg combination let go of her leg, Nezuko scrambled to her feet and kicked the DMN thing into the nearest tree with maximum force. "I'm really starting to get tired of this," she yelled as the head dropped to the ground, leaving a hefty dent in the tree it had hit. "That ought to teach you." Nezuko spat. The head-leg lunged for her, and she sliced out of habit. "DMN it." Nezuko scolded herself as the pieces reformed. Great, just great. Adding to the problem, the one thing she was trying not to do. Then she noticed something. The demons had kanji on their tongues. She'd caught a glimpse of the other demons' kanji as well. But these two pieces had the same kanji on their tongues as the bird demon. Joy. So the original demon can only split into the four, and every other division remains connected to whichever of the four was cut. That must mean. The two demon pieces screamed, and while it hurt, it wasn't deafening. Nezuko tightened her grip on her sword, a manic grin creeping up her face. Their attack power dropped. She realized as she focused on the opening thread, the lines leading straight to the tongues. As she sliced at them, the bird demon dove toward her. Impressive. But that won't save you, little slayer, he laughed, swiping his talons. Nezuko barely dodged, still getting cut. Do you like my talons? Aren't they swift and sharp? Better yet, they're even strong enough to crush diamonds. I have to get back to Tanjirou and Genya. But I can't do that while this demon is attacking me. Nezuko thought as a talon sliced her cheek. She continued to narrowly dodge attacks, searching for an answer. Watching the bird demon, she recalled something her father told her back home. Papa? How do birds fly? Aren't their bodies too heavy? Not at all, Nezuko. Their bodies are different from ours. They are much lighter, so it's easier for their wings to carry them in the air. Its blood demon art is that screeching attack, it can't be using a blood demon art to fly. Nezuko noted as the bird demon dove again. This time, Nezuko raised her sword and focused on her instincts. Guess there's only one way to find out if I'm right. The faint silhouette she had seen against the Yorichi Type 0 appeared, and Nezuko struck just as the demon filled it. Make that joyful blood spill, he declared with an excited laugh. Nezuko turned to him with a smirk. You first, bird brain, she chuckled. The demon's skull split in half, and she lunged for him. It didn't take long for him to heal, but it was enough for her to get close. He raised his foot to shield himself. Perfect. Nezuko responded by stabbing him through his leg and into his jaw. The demon took off, proving Nezuko's guess correct. His body was light. All right, I'm steering. Nezuko yelled, guiding the demon toward the building her brother and Genya were fighting the other demons in. She didn't let go, even as the talons dug into her back. She arrived to the site of Sekido zapping Tanjiro with his staff, which he seemed to have stabbed into her brother's neck. Karaku and the fourth demon were nowhere to be seen. She couldn't see Genya, either. All right, down we go, she muttered, steering the bird demon to the ground. The landing kicked up dust, and Nezuko kicked at his knee with all her might to break his foot off. Then she twisted her blade and pulled it up, cutting his tongue in half. She turned to Sekido with a murderous glare. Get away from my brother, she snarled. You loathsome brat. Sekido spat, releasing the still crackling staff and running towards Nezuko while creating a new staff. I hope this works. She thought as she lunged, letting the new staff stab the foot. Much to her relief, the bird demon's foot was unaffected by the lightning. Even as separate entities, a demon's power wouldn't attack its own cells. Not without Kibutsuji's curse being activated. She used Sekido's shock against him, cutting his tongue and dislodging the second staff before running to Tanjiro. "Hold on, Tanjiro," she told him as she wrapped the toes of the bird foot around the staff. A part of her was glad the crackling lightning muffled the squelch of the staff being withdrawn. Tanjiro shook his head, rubbing his healing neck. "Are you okay?" Nezuko asked. Tanjiro nodded, and Nezuko felt a pinch and static in her back. At the same time, a silhouette in the exact shape of Sekido's staff appeared, emerging from her neck. She ducked just as Tanjiro lunged, catching the staff that had been aimed for Nezuko. That blow could have paralyzed her. And that would have been if she was lucky. Tanjiro snarled at Sekido, which Nezuko took as a warning for the demon to back off. "You annoying little," Sekido cut himself off with pained yells. Nezuko looked up, unsurprised to see Sekido. Set. Ablaze in a red inferno. Focus on the tongue. It's their weak spot. Nezuko told Tanjiro. He nodded, and the red fire brightened in Sekido's mouth a moment later. "Mind if I rejoin the party?" Nezuko turned to the sky, spotting Karaku with his fan raised. She could also see familiar burns littering his skin. NNMMHG. Tanjiro reached for her as Karaku swung his fan, the wind creating a crushing pressure on both siblings. The floor buckled under them, and gave out. As they crashed onto the floor, the world went dark. After rescuing Kanamori from another blood demon art creation, he and Kotetsu led Muichiro to a nearby shed to check on Haganezuka. As they approached the building, however, Muichiro stopped in his tracks. A demon was nearby. And a powerful one, at that. Kanamori and Kotetsu clung to him as he continued his approach. He walked slowly, keeping his eyes out for any unusual movement. A pot rolled out from the bushes, standing itself up. "Hyo!" A voice emerged from the pot as it bounced. "This must be the demon I'm looking for," Muichiro thought. As if summoned by his thoughts, a creature emerged from the pot. It wasn't the same demon as what attacked him in Kamado, that much was certain. And he could see the rank engraved into the demon's oddly placed eyes. Upper 5. 2 ranks of the 12 Kazuki were here, then. He would deal with this one, and then deal with the first one, whichever rank it was. "Why, hello, there," the demon called out with a bow. "My name is Gyako, and it is my pleasure to be meeting you all tonight." Muichiro let the demon ramble, trying to recall what had been reported about the last encounter with this demon. Then he saw the pile of swordsmiths, and heard the screams of those that were somehow still alive. It made his blood boil, and he almost thought he heard another voice screaming. One that sounded like his own. How odd. "Hey," he spoke up, taking a breath. "You'd better cut that out, you piece of CRP." With that, he lunged for the demon. The sooner he took its head, the sooner he could either get to the village or help Kamado with the other demon. Tanjiro groaned as he came to, wincing as his broken bones healed themselves. "The demon's awake," the green demon cackled. "Let's get him while Sekido finishes healing his tongue," the yellow demon laughed before diving into the massive hole its friend left. Tanjiro ducked under the attack, puncturing his palm and igniting his fist before swinging at the yellow demon. The red demon tried to yell something, but its burnt tongue had clearly not healed enough for it to talk. Good. Red seemed to be the ringleader of the four, being unable to talk should prove helpful. "Be careful, Yurogi. It'd be pretty bad if the little guy roasted ya," the green demon declared. As the yellow demon ascended, Tanjiro spotted an unmoving figure in the rubble, hand still holding the black blade. "Nezuko." Tanjiro ran to his sister, rolling her over to find that she had fallen unconscious. It didn't surprise him, her body didn't heal instantly, but he worried about what injuries she may have. "Show me your joyful blood," the yellow demon yelled as he dove again. Tanjiro dove over Nezuko, getting cut by the yellow demon's talons once it reached them again. As long as those talons didn't touch Nezuko, though, he didn't care how many times he got hit. He just had to keep his sister safe. Tanjiro focused on his spilled blood, setting it ablaze. CRP. That should keep him away. Tanjiro thought, gathering Nezuko in his arms and standing up. He had to get her out of here. Her sword slipped from her grasp, and Tanjiro picked it up. She would need it when she woke up. Don't let them escape, you idiots. Oh, wonderful, the red demon had his tongue back in working order. And don't get any of his blood on you. That fire burns like the sun. No wonder those burns are taking so long to heal, the green one laughed as he pointed to his own burnt face. Shut it, Karaku. Tanjiro raised the sword in his grasp. It felt wrong, but strangely right at the same time, to hold Nezuko's sword. Get him, the red one snapped. Tanjiro subconsciously changed his breathing, a faint memory coming to the surface. There exists a way to breathe, so that you'll never get tired, a voice echoed in the back of Tanjiro's mind. For just a moment, he saw a figure dancing in the snow. It wasn't Nezuko, Tanjiro knew that much. But the figure repeated the same moves Nezuko had. He could remember how to do the movements, if only faintly. Tanjiro took another breath, faint memories of guiding hands on his shoulders mixing with the sight of Nezuko dancing with fire enveloping her blade. Hinakami Kagura. His mind supplied as the yellow demon dove again. Its limbs were burnt, the charred wings slowing it down, but it was no less determined in its attack. Tanjiro raised his sister's blade, then swung. Raging Sun. Fire danced off the blade as it cut through the yellow demon's legs, earning a surprised squawk. Tanjiro used the distraction to run, cradling Nezuko as best he could in one arm and holding her sword in the other hand. He could do this, he could protect her and get her to safety. As the traitor ducked away, Sekido's mind reeled. This traitorous demon knew a breath style. How? When could that demon have learned such a skill, and with a technique that Yurogi was still recovering from? Had the younger demon used his blood demon art with the slash? How could he do that? Sekido wondered before a vision flashed before him. Daki attacking the girl in the Asanoha Haori. Burning pain as the girl's black sword cut through the false upper six obi, then Jutaro's neck. Fire dancing across the girl's blade. A swordsman that sowed seeds of instinctive terror in Lord Musen's cells. The demon used the same techniques as the girl. Sekido thought as the memories stopped. She must have taught her demon how to use the breath style, somehow. And if that technique burned like those memories implied, mixing it with his blood demon art could spell their doom. Especially if they managed to find Hentengu. Sekido snarled, turning to Karaku. Bring the building down on top of them, if you have to. We cannot let that demon escape, he snapped, getting Karaku's usual, and infuriating, smirk in reply. As if the idiot hadn't also gotten burned by that fire. You got it, Sekido. Karaku laughed as he leapt down to the lower level. Sekido then turned to Yurogi, who was still struggling to heal his legs. Soon enough, those brats would be dealt with. And where had Izetsu vanished to with that other slayer? She was bouncing, and an arm was wrapped around her. Nezuko's eyes fluttered open, and she was quickly met with her brother's Haori. Tanjiro must have woken up before me. Nezuko reasoned before realizing her hands were empty. Where did her sword go? Nezuko was about to ask when a metallic gleam caught her eye, bringing her attention to her sword. Her sword, which was in her brother's other hand. And in a proper grip, too. Had he used it? Tanjiro. Nezuko spoke up. Tanjiro only spared a glance in her direction before turning his focus back on running. HMMMNGH. Nezuko could only nod, and grabbed onto Tanjiro's Haori to prevent herself from falling. She peeked over his shoulder, her eyes widening at the sight of Karaku at the end of the hall. Tanjiro. Her brother turned to the demon, then turned down the next hall. Not so fast. Kurako cackled. Tanjiro's only response was a quiet growl, his grip tightening on Nezuko's sword. Static raced along her limbs, and she turned to see the phantom strikes of lightning. And the clearest one wasn't far. If Tanjiro kept going, they'd get hit. Tanjiro, wait, she yelled. Tanjiro skidded to a halt just as the lightning struck, narrowly missing the siblings. Give me a second. Nezuko whispered before maneuvering herself onto Tanjiro's back. Once she was sure she wouldn't fall off, Nezuko watched for the future strikes. I'll let you know when to dodge, she told Tanjiro, who nodded before taking off. Is your aim off or something, Sekido? I would have thought you'd fry these guys easily. Kurako declared teasingly. Be quiet, Kurako. Sekido snapped as his lightning became more erratic. A large bolt hit the ground beside Nezuko and Tanjiro, with smaller bolts coming off of it. Tanjiro. Look, Nezuko got cut off by her own surprised yelp as Tanjiro threw her onto the ground and dove over her. He planted himself on the ground, keeping his limbs away from Nezuko as the lightning struck him. Looks like you got him, the bird demon laughed, barely audible above the crackling lightning. As the lightning stopped, Tanjiro slumped over with a groan. Nezuko quickly got up and grabbed her sword, hoisting Tanjiro onto her shoulders. She silently thanked Kyojiro for his strength training. Where she couldn't even drag a normal-sized Tanjiro around before her training, she found it much easier to carry her brother in his adult form now. Alright, now we've gotta go. Nezuko thought before turning tail and sprinting into the closest enclosed hallway. Kurako followed close behind, waving his fan and creating those winds. The attacks were destroying the supports, Nezuko could hear the remaining beams creaking under the added weight. She turned another corner, and heard Kurako laugh behind her. Where do you think you're going? He asked before unleashing another attack. Oh, no. The wind sent the siblings flying out of the building. And they had made it to the side the cliff was on. MMPH. Nezuko turned to Tanjiro as he grabbed the blade of her sword, and the two descended. They crashed to the ground, and rubble landed on top of Tanjiro. Well, I'd say I outdid myself. Kurako cackled. Nezuko smacked her hand over her mouth to keep herself quiet. Luckily, the dust and smoke made good cover along with the rubble. Let's find those pests. Sekido snarled. Nezuko grabbed onto her sword, and tugged. When it didn't budge, she turned to see Tanjiro was still holding the blade like his life depended on it. What are you doing? Nezuko whispered, peeking over the rubble, pinning her brother down. All we gotta do is wait for this smoke to clear, and we can finish them off. Kurako laughed while Nezuko sank back down into her hiding place. Tanjiro, we don't have time for this. Nezuko hissed, tugging harder on her sword. Let go of my sword. I'll cut you free. Tanjiro's grip only tightened, and red began to drip onto the blade. Tanjiro, stop it. You're cutting yourself, stop. But Tanjiro didn't listen, dragging his bleeding hands across the black steel. Nezuko wanted to cry, to scream at Tanjiro for hurting himself, but she couldn't give away their position. MMPH, Tanjiro nodded at the blood-covered sword, finally releasing it. Seconds later, red fire enveloped the metal. Nezuko gasped at the sight. He did it to use his blood demon art. She realized. Underneath the fire, she could see her sword changing color. Black began to give way to bright red, matching the shade of the fire. So your sword turns red? An unfamiliar voice asked. Nezuko turned around to see a appealing woman standing in front of her. Mr. Samurai, how does that work? The woman asked with a bright smile, her blue eyes shining. Samurai? Nezuko thought. Then it struck her. This was another inherited memory. You said it only turns bright red in the heat of battle, right? The woman said. And the rest of the time, it's black, like obsidian. That's amazing. And it's so appealing. Right, Sumiyoshi? Black sword. Nezuko thought as an image of Yorichi appeared, the man's back facing her. His sword was drawn, small sparks dancing off the blade, as if he had just used a form. He had a black sword, just like me. The first sun breather had a black sword. As she stood up, raising the blazing sword in her grasp, something clicked for Nezuko. If I recall correctly, black blades usually mean the user does not know what specific breathing style to MSTR. Some believe it means the wielder will not last very long. That was what Kyojuro said when she received her first sword. No. The black blade is the blade of a sun breather. Nezuko realized. With a determined glare, she made her way to the demons. As she came to a stop, the trio turned to her. Still no sign of that last one, wherever he was. Found ya. Karaku declared while the yellow clone flew towards Nezuko. She stood firm, taking a breath and pushing her heart to go faster. She remembered the feeling from when she, Yuzui, and her friends defeated Upper Six. The heat that had been racing through her veins, the way her heart seemed to want to beat out of her chest. She recalled those, and pushed herself to warm up as her heart beat faster and faster. Heat that almost burned spread across her scar, and she raised her sword high. Hinakami Kagura. As the demon slayer girl raised her sword, Sekido was faced with the memories from Lord Musen's cells again. Despite the lack of resemblance, Sekido could see the swordsman in the girl. The fiery mark on her forehead that resembled a demon's crest, the blazing sword, even the form she used. It all matched, images of the swordsman overlapping with the sight of the girl. Sun Dragon Halo. As the bird demon stalled, his eyes wide and mouth agape, Nezuko raced forward with a speed similar to what she had used against Ume. This time, however, she wasn't holding her breath. Her sword cut through the bird demon's neck easily, and she ran towards Karaku. Again, he was decapitated swiftly. Then she spun towards Sekido. You will not win. Sekido yelled as he raised his staff to protect himself. It was pointless. Nezuko's sword cut through both the staff and his neck with ease. Head dance. Nezuko came to a stop, turning to the beheaded demons. Now she had to find the main body before the emotion demons healed enough to reattach their heads. What did you do? Karaku yelled. Calm down. We can regenerate, and then we'll reattach our heads. It's just going to take some time. Sekido snapped. Nezuko had to hurry. She ran to where Tanjiro was still pinned, slicing the rubble and pulling him out from underneath. Once he got back on his feet, Tanjiro pulled her close and hugged Nezuko. I'm okay. I'm okay. Nezuko whispered. We need to find the main body. Quick. Heavy breathing brought her attention to the nearby forest. The last demon was pinned to the tree by his own spear, the upper half of his face in the hands of a familiar figure. Genya. You're okay. Nezuko exclaimed, running toward the boy. I'm glad you survived. I was so worried when, she stopped dead in her tracks when he turned to her with a snarl. Genya. You're okay. Nezuko exclaimed, running toward the boy. I'm glad you survived. I was so worried when, she stopped dead in her tracks when he turned to her with a snarl. His scara had turned black, and fangs dripping with saliva replaced his canines. Genya stalked towards her, and Nezuko barely kept herself from taking a step back as she raised her sword. Upper 4. Must have. Turn Genya into a demon. Genya, she called out hesitantly. Genya, you're drooling. If you just wait a second. Genya cut her off by seizing her at the neck. Stay out of my way, he growled as Nezuko tried in vain to dislodge his chokehold. This is my chance to finally become a Hashira. I won't let you ruin this for me, he yelled before he was punched in the face by Tanjiro, who immediately proceeded to scratch at Genya's face while snarling ferociously. Luckily, in his shock, Genya released Nezuko. "Tanjiro, stop it." Nezuko coughed, pulling Tanjiro back before he could gouge out Genya's eyes. "I'm okay," she added before turning to Genya as the boy got up. "Something's off about this. Because you look like a demon, but if you're newly turned, why aren't you going feral?" "Because I'm not a demon." Genya snapped, acting as if it was obvious. As if he didn't have bleeding claw wounds on his face that had begun healing before their eyes. "Well, forgive me for assuming you were. Most humans don't have black all over their eyes," Nezuko retorted, pointing to her own eyes. Genya's eyes widened, and whatever retort he had died on his tongue. "I forgot about that," he spat under his breath. It's an ability of mine," he admitted, seeming to shrink in on himself a little. "I eat demons, and then gain their abilities. It's not permanent, but it's useful when you can't use breaths." "Oh," Nezuko said, turning to Tanjiro. She was only a little surprised when he walked up to Genya, and then proceeded to shove his forearm in the other boy's face. "What the?" Genya exclaimed, trying to shove the offered forearm away. "Just eat it." Nezuko sighed. "He won't stop until you do," she added. Genya looked at her as if she was completely insane, which was not surprising in the slightest. "He's offering. Might as well take advantage of having a demon you don't have to fight to eat. He tried to rip my face off 2 minutes ago." Genya retorted. "In his defense, you attacked me first." Nezuko replied. "How is that a defense, exactly?" Genya asked. "He's protective. Trust me, this is a slap on the wrist compared to what he's done to demons who threaten to do worse to me," Nezuko told him. Genya sighed in defeat, taking a bite and stepping back from Tanjiro. Nezuko looked across the rubble. The emotion demons hadn't dissolved, despite being decapitated. So her guess was right. There was a main body, separate from the 4 emotions, that needed to be beheaded. She turned back to Genya and Tanjiro, watching her brother regenerate the flesh he had let Genya eat. "Well, now that that's sorted out, we need to find the main body and take it out." "I'm taking this demon out," Genya grumbled. "Fine by me, but we need to work together to actually find the DMN thing," Nezuko retorted. "There's no need to be stubborn about this. All I'm asking is for you to let us find the demon. Then you can blast its head off to your heart's content." Genya glared at her skeptically. "How do I know you're not trying to get me to let my guard down?" he asked. Nezuko turned to Tanjiro, then back to Genya. "I kept him from completely clawing your eyes out, didn't I?" Nezuko replied. Genya huffed before shrugging. "Consider that my show of goodwill," Nezuko told the older boy with a smirk, turning to her brother. "If you don't mind, Tanjiro." "Humph." Tanjiro's nose began twitching, and Nezuko turned to the emotion demons with her sword raised. They were nearly healed. "Got it," Genya said before taking off into the trees. "All right, Tanjiro. Our job is to keep those demons off Genya's tail," Nezuko whispered, getting an affirmative growl in reply before the siblings lunged for the 4 demons. Karaku bolted for the tree line, and Tanjiro ran to intervene. "How saddening," the blue demon sighed as he impaled Tanjiro on his spear. Nezuko almost turned to help her brother, but Karaku drew her attention. She had to defend Genya. She ran to the demon, her blade raised. Hinakami Kagura. Solar heat haze. Just as she sliced, Nezuko was pushed to the ground by Karaku's wind attack. Karaku yelled in shock, and Nezuko smirked before rolling into a headstand and swinging her legs back as she straightened them. Karaku, still reeling from the attack, was sent flying away from both Nezuko and Genya. "Keep him in place, so I can crucify him," the red demon snarled. Tanjiro growled in reply, a part of him wishing he still had a sword. Come on. I need to do something. Tanjiro thought, his gaze dropping to the blood coating the spear. Perfect. He activated his blood demon art, grabbing the blue demon's arms and pulling it close as he did so. Once he knew he had left some pretty bad burns on the blue demon, he turned to the red demon. Tanjiro punctured his palm with his claws as the red demon raised his staff. You won't be getting that close this time, you traitor, the red demon yelled. Focus. Tanjiro told himself, visualizing the fire that danced around Nezuko's blade as she fought. He could faintly hear voices in his mind. Nezuko's, his own, and the man from earlier. The heat from his fire built in his palm, and he willed it to take shape. Anytime, now, Genya. Nezuko snapped as she cut off the joy demon's wing. Hopefully, that'll slow him down a bit. I can't find the DMN thing. Genya yelled back. Give me a second. Nezuko told him, focusing on her instincts. The silhouettes sharpened, but Nezuko also spotted the opening thread. She followed it quickly, noticing it led much closer to the ground. Look down. It's near the ground, look there, she called out, deflecting another attack. It's so DMN puny. Genya exclaimed, shortly followed by a gunshot. Nezuko turned to Tanjiro as she continued to fend off the yellow demon. Her eyes widened in shock at what she saw. Tanjiro lunged for Sekido, cutting through the rage demon with a blazing sword of his own. No, that isn't a sword. Nezuko realized. That's Tanjiro's blood demon art. He must be using it with the Hinakami Kagura. She raised her sword and ran, severing Sekido's arm before turning to Tanjiro. That's new, she chuckled, pointing to the fiery sword. Tanjiro nodded with a concealed smile. Nezuko smirked at him, and they turned back to the other three demons. Wait. There were only two, Karaku and the sorrow demon. Where's Joy? Nezuko gasped. I thought he would have followed me when I went after Sekido. A familiar sound echoed through the trees. A sword had broken. Tanjiro grabbed Nezuko's arm, pulling her into the woods. As they ran, Nezuko spotted the joy demon's wings and talons. His arm was reaching out, clawed fingers curling up around. Genya. Nezuko's eyes widened, then she turned to Tanjiro. He nodded with a growl as he extinguished his blood demon art, picking up Nezuko and throwing her at the joy demon. I'll be taking great joy in pulverizing your skull, the demon declared enthusiastically. Hinakami Kagura. Nezuko yelled, swinging her sword as she got in range. Burning bones, summer sun. She finished the arc, severing the demon's arms before he could crush Genya's head. She landed in a crouch, then leapt to kick the demon with all her strength. The joy demon's wings ended up in Tanjiro's grasp, the appendages getting scorched moments later. Thanks. Genya gasped. I thought I was gonna die. You're okay. Nezuko assured him. Plus, you have your regeneration, right? I can't regrow my head. Genya admitted. That's my weak spot. If my head goes, I'm dead. Nezuko nodded, gently patting Genya's shoulder. We'll watch your back. Nezuko told him as Tanjiro approached. No, Genya sighed, turning to Nezuko. You have to be the one to kill it. My sword's broken, and that demon's no bigger than a field mouse. Only a breathing style can give you the strength to kill that thing. I'll. Blood demon art, the trio turned to see the sorrow demon stumbling towards them, still horribly burned. Weeping spears. Dozens of glowing spears appeared in the air, headed right for them. Nezuko squeaked as a hand circled her arm and tossed her away from the spears. Genya. Nezuko screamed as the spears pierced her fellow slayer, leaving several holes in their wake. It could only be because of his regeneration that Genya even survived that. Find that demon. Genya snarled. Kill it. It's gotta be you, Nezuko. You hear me? Got it. Nezuko replied, getting back on her feet and focusing. The thread appeared, and her head snapped in the direction it led. Something yelped near the tree roots, and Nezuko immediately spotted the demon. Genya was right, he was tiny. The demon took off, and Nezuko followed. Just decapitate it, and this fight will be over. Nezuko told herself as she chased after the demon. To think such a tiny and cowardly demon was controlling the other four. Not that it didn't make sense, of course such a coward would have bodyguards to fight their battles. It was more shocking a demon as powerful as Upper Four felt a need for such things. They came into a clearing, and Nezuko leapt with all the power she could get into her legs. Upper Four shrieked as she landed in front of him, turning to run in the other direction. Please. Have mercy, he wailed as Tanjiro ran into the clearing with his fists ablaze, cutting off his escape. Just shut up and drop dead. Nezuko snapped back as she swung her sword, cutting into the demon's neck. Despite its size, however, Upper Four's neck wasn't completely cut. Damn it. Just split, already. Nezuko thought, gasping as the red fire on the blade extinguished. CRP. Tanjiro's blood demon art wore off. Just as she turned to Tanjiro, intending to ask for help, a sudden pressure invaded the air. Hurry! Hurry, Lady Kanroji! Urara declared from the sky. The Swordsmith village is under attack. We must make haste. Gotta hurry. Mitsuri thought as she sprinted through the woods, following her Kasugai crow. I can't believe I was posted so close by. What a miracle, the love Hashira gasped. If she hadn't been so close, she probably wouldn't have made it in time to help. At least there were demon slayers there, so the village wasn't completely defenseless. Taketo would undoubtedly be able to at least hold the demons back until she got there. And hopefully, Nezuko was healed enough to help as well. I'm on my way. Mitsuri declared, pushing herself to speed up. Muichiro stared at the ground, processing the fact he was going to die. He couldn't escape this water pot. I'm sorry, MSTR. The mist Hashira thought, starting to close his eyes. Please make sure to send at least 2 Hashira. Hopefully, they were already on their way. You really think you're going to die? Muichiro opened his eyes, his turquoise gaze meeting the dark pink eyes of Rengoku's Tsuguko. The figure in front of him was misty, but undoubtedly the girl Rengoku took under his wing. What makes you think that? Seems silly to give up so fast. Especially as a Hashira, she told him with a warm smile. The same smile she gave him when she offered to join him on his search for Kanamori. Why did it feel so familiar? But I failed. I can't get myself out of this. How can I expect anything else? Muichiro asked. I'm a Hashira. I'm supposed to be the strongest. If I can't save myself, who can? Do you really expect to have to do everything by yourself? Kamado asked, raising a brow. These kinds of things need help. You shouldn't expect yourself to be a one-man army. But who would help me? Muichiro asked the ghostly image of Kamado. Helping others tends to have a way of coming back around to help you in return. Kamado replied as her expression settled back into a warm smile. But it looked wrong. Like that specific smile didn't belong to her. Humans are capable of great things for the sake of others. Nezuko never said that. Why did I remember her saying that? Muichiro wondered. Mist seemed to shroud the clearing, surrounding both Muichiro and Nezuko. You can do this, Muichiro. You're capable of greatness. Nezuko continued before the mist covered her form. When it cleared, a man was in her place. One with dark red eyes that were so very familiar. Humans are capable of great things, Muichiro, but only the greatest things can be done for the sake of others, the man said, smiling in the exact same way Nezuko had. But it fit on this man's face. Muichiro's eyes widened, the man's face placing itself where it belonged in his memories. Father. Muichiro couldn't believe it. He was remembering. The vision of his father was interrupted by a knife stabbing at the water pot. He looked at the blade, finding its holder to be Kotetsu. The boy was stabbing at the water repeatedly, likely trying to free Muichiro. Why is it so rubbery? Kotetsu demanded. Something moved behind him. Another blood demon art creature. Unlike the massive fish, this one was small and resembled a crab or a lobster. And it was focused on Kotetsu. No. Run. Move. Get out of the way. Muichiro slammed his hand against the watery walls, desperately wishing he could warn Kotetsu of the incoming attack. But he remained oblivious until the creature was too close to dodge. It stabbed the boy. Right in his solar plexus. It was a lethal blow. The kid wouldn't last much longer. He was going to die, and all Muichiro could do was watch before he drowned. Why? Why would you do that? Kotetsu stood up, pulling his mask aside and pressing his face to the pot. What are you doing? As if answering his unspoken question, Kotetsu breathed into the water. He was giving Muichiro air. The mist Hashira breathed in as much of the breath as he could. It was enough for an attack. Mist breathing, fifth form. Sea of clouds and haze. The move slashed the pot, freeing Muichiro. An almost burning sensation spread over his face, but he ignored it. Only the greatest things can be done for the sake of others, his father's voice echoed quietly in his ear. Muichiro understood now. Nezuko. Thank you. Muichiro thought. While their smiles weren't identical, the warmth was something they shared. A warmth that told you everything was going to be alright. Muichiro began ripping the needles out of his face. As he did so, more memories began to spring forth. His mother with her own uniquely warm smile, soon replaced with gasps for air and harsh coughing. The storm outside, as he piled his blankets on top of her while she fought a losing battle with illness. She didn't make it through the night. His father, showing him how to wield an axe once he was old enough. Muichiro had constantly wanted to help his father with their family lumber business. The same night of that storm, his father had gone out. He wanted to try and find some herbs. Something to help Muichiro's mother. But he had fallen off the mountainside, found with blood under his head and the herbs he had been so desperate to get in his hand. Takedo Muichiro was 10 years old when he became an orphan. He had to bury both parents, and was alone. No, that wasn't right. He was 11 when he was alone, there was someone else beside him at his parents' burial. Another boy. The same age as him, with an identical face, though the other boy's expression was set into a glare. Yuikuru. His twin brother. His big brother. Who had always seemed so angry and cold, especially after losing their parents. Come to think of it, Muichiro kind of took on his personality when he lost his memory. Why did he lose it? Why did he forget everything? Lady Amane's visit. Learning their ancestor was a great swordsman in the corps, and they very likely could have that same potential in their veins. Yuikuru chasing her off both times she came to offer them a home with the demon slayers. Their argument, the months of silent treatment after Yuikuru scolded him for being so naive and foolish to think they could help anyone. That hot summer's night. Muichiro had gotten up to get some water. He didn't even notice the intruder until it had turned to him. Then Yuikuru was between him and the creature, the older twin's arm flying off in a single swipe of the monster's hand. Muichiro remembered pulling his brother aside, wishing so desperately that Yuikuru wasn't bleeding and screaming in pain. Then came the blind rage. All he could think about was killing the monster that hurt his twin. Making sure it never came near them again. And then Yuikuru was too far gone to be saved. He died begging for something. But what? I know the truth about his name. I knew all along. The Mu in Muichiro stands for infinity. That was what Muichiro had whispered in his dying breaths while Muichiro clung to his remaining hand. Muichiro had once said the mu stood for incompetence. But he didn't mean it. Muichiro understood now. Muichiro just wanted to keep him safe after losing their parents. How terrified was he of losing Muichiro too? Muichiro turned to the shed. It was still standing. He could think about his recovering memories later. For now, he had to kill Upper 5. If anyone else runs into Upper 5, keep an eye on his pot. Nezuko's voice echoed distantly. Right. She had fought Upper 5 before. As had Shinazugawa. Muichiro could remember hearing the debrief. Maybe, if he had started getting his memory back sooner, this fight wouldn't have gone quite as sideways as it had. Each pot's pattern will tell you what attack to expect. Thanks, Nezuko. Muichiro thought, approaching Upper 5. He still had people to save. Behind. Ice raced up Nezuko's spine as a drumbeat echoed through the woods, and she lunged to the side. A wooden dragon head slammed into the ground where she had been standing, and the main demon screamed. "DMN it," she hissed. A figure, this one much younger than the other emotion demons, appeared from the dust. "You awful villains," he growled, coming to stand next to the main body. A smaller wooden dragon surrounded the tiny demon, wrapping him in a protective cocoon. "You dare to go after a helpless creature that could fit into the palm of your hand? Despicable. Despicable." Nezuko gasped incredulously, tightening her grip on her sword. "What's despicable is you claiming that tiny demon is helpless just because he's small. You've killed countless humans, and clearly have no regard for those lives you took. And were any of those lives important to you, specifically, little girl?" the new demon asked. "Did I kill one of your loved ones? Or a friend? Why should that matter after all the lives you took?" Nezuko snapped. "A monster like you can't be allowed to continue wreaking havoc, so we will make sure your head is severed tonight." The demon growled in response, hitting the drums surrounding him. The dragons attacked, and the trio was forced on the defensive. "I hope Takedo is having an easier time than we are," Nezuko thought. The Mist Hashira had probably gone to protect the village. One of the dragons came at her from the side, its mouth wide open to bite her head off. MMPH. Instead of Nezuko's head, the dragon chomped down on Tanjiro's leg. Once they returned to solid ground, Nezuko got back on her feet and pressed her back against her brother's. "Genya. How's it going on your end?" Nezuko asked as she and Tanjiro launched their own attacks, guarding each other's backs. "What do you think?" Genya snapped as gunshots echoed through the clearing. Nezuko turned to the younger demon, her eyes widening when she saw the main body being further encased. "We have to get to the main body," Nezuko yelled, leaping away from another lightning attack. It separated her from Tanjiro, leaving them both a lot more vulnerable. And it seemed that the younger clone of Upper 4 had focused more on her brother. "You," the demon snarled, pointing one of his weapons at Tanjiro. "You are the worst of the villains here. You received the gift that is his blood, and you spit on the power gifted to you. A traitor like you must face a consequence of the highest degree, which is why you will be brought before him. And you will suffer for this betrayal of your kind. To see a demon cohorting with these villains, it makes my blood boil." "Oh, shut up already," Nezuko shouted, leaping onto a nearby dragon. "I'm sick and tired of this victim act. Nobody cares." "Gah!" Genya shot at the dragons, putting away the gun to catch his attacker with his bare hands. Nezuko leapt into the air with all her might, using her better perspective to figure out the dragon's reach. If she had to guess, they only extended to 66 feet. If they could get out of that range, they could catch a breather and recuperate enough to not be scrambling to find an opening. A dragon reached for her, and Nezuko raised her sword. "Hinakami Kagura," her thought cut off as the dragon screamed right in her face. Nezuko heard a pop, followed by ringing in her muted screams as she fell toward the ground. Her back made contact with a tree, and she hit the forest floor moments later. She groaned, faintly hearing Genya's gun. She pressed a hand to her ear, her eyes widening when her palm came away bloody. My eardrums burst. She looked up, spotting a dragon headed right for her. Get out of range. 66 feet. Run. She told herself as she got to her feet and broke into a sprint. She felt an insane amount of pressure behind her, barely missing her feet, and looked back to see a familiar leaf pattern. Just a little farther. Once she was sure she had gotten out of range, Nezuko turned around. To her shock, the dragon chasing her released smaller dragons out of its mouth. The smaller dragons extended, their wooden jaws clamping down on her left forearm. As it pulled her in, Nezuko spotted Tanjiro and Genya fighting to break free from their own dragons. When she turned back to hers, she was met with its mouth wide open to swallow her whole. It pulled her in, and darkness consumed Nezuko's vision. Nezuko's screaming pulled Tanjiro's attention from his fight to get free, and what he saw horrified him. Nezuko, arm in the maw of one of the tree dragons as it pulled her into the big one's mouth. No. Tanjiro's eyes widened, stinging with unshed tears. He failed. He couldn't protect his sister. And now she was going to get eaten. Farewell, the demon in charge of the tree dragons grumbled. CRP. Genya thought as he struggled against his own wooden prison. That dragon just swallowed Nezuko whole. Growling pulled his attention from his devoured teammate to her demon brother. Tanjirou? Genya asked, jumping slightly when the demon's bamboo muzzle snapped. Then Tanjiro swung his head into the jaws holding his arm. To Genya's surprise, it splintered the wood. Tanjiro head-butted again, somehow remaining unfazed, then rammed his bleeding fist into the hole his head left. Just how hard was his DMN skull? If Genya tried that, even with his demonic enhancements, he knew he'd only concuss himself. What are you doing? The new demon demanded, only getting a feral snarl in response before the dragon holding Tanjiro lit on fire. The red inferno spread quickly, burning the demonic wood. Okay. Don't get on this guy's bad side. Genya told himself before yelling in pain, feeling a burning sensation on his arm. He looked down, and immediately went to pat out the fire on his sleeve. He looked at the normal trees, and found them unaffected by the red fire. It only affects demons. It must be burning me because I ate demon flesh earlier. Genya realized. Come to think of it, he'd been having stomach cramps for the last little while. Ever since Tanjiro let him have a chunk of flesh. Did Tanjiro's cells affect other demon cells? She could feel the demon's throat closing around her. Nezuko couldn't even move her arm to cut into the wood. She was going to die. Crushed by a giant wooden dragon. It was hopeless. I'm sorry, Tanjiro. Nezuko thought. A blade, one a very familiar shade of pink, sliced into the wood not even a foot away from her sword. Nezuko felt a choked laugh escape her as the pink steel cut into the wood again, setting her free. Then a familiar Haori entered her vision, followed by familiar pink and green braids. Mitsuri! Nezuko exclaimed joyfully, hugging the love Hashira. Thank you. I thought I was going to die. Jairu, ire. Mitsuri turned to Nezuko with a worried expression. What? Nezuko asked. Mitsuri, I can't hear you. Mitsuri's eyes widened, then she pointed below. Nezuko followed, gaping at the crimson inferno below. Get me down there. Nezuko snapped, barely resisting the urge to shake Mitsuri's shoulders. Hurry. Mitsuri nodded, leaping and running along the dragons. To say Mitsuri was shocked would be a massive understatement. Of course, she knew Tanjiro's blood demon art involved fire and only affected demons. What she didn't expect when she arrived, however, was said blood demon art spreading like a wildfire across the obviously demonic trees. Someone must have really made Tanjiro mad, if they managed to push such a sweet boy to go all out like this. Mitsuri thought as she made her way to the forest floor. She landed beside the boys, and turned to Tanjiro. She gaped in shock, watching him battle the trees with ease, setting them further ablaze and catching what scarce few weren't being reduced to ashes when they attacked. Tanjiro! Mitsuri called out while Nezuko got off her back, hoping to calm the demon boy down. Tanjiro, I'm okay. Nezuko yelled. Tanjiro whipped around, revealing that his muzzle was gone, and his eyes widened when he saw Nezuko. Nezuko! Tanjiro cried as he ran up and hugged his sister. Nezuko returned the embrace before turning to the demon, then back to Mitsuri. That demon is upper 4. But the demon in charge of the dragons isn't the main body, she said. That damage to her ears had to be doing a number on her. Mitsuri remembered Rengoku telling her about intentionally rupturing his eardrums on a mission. An attack damaging one's hearing had to be even more painful. Mitsuri nodded, turning to Tanjiro and Genya. I'll buy you some time to behead that main body, she told them. Genya and Tanjiro nodded, the latter grabbing Nezuko's hand before they began running. Mitsuri then turned to the demon, sword at the ready. Alright, demon. I was already going to take you down tonight. But you tried to kill my sister. So now all bets are off. I'm gonna go all out. I'm not expecting much, you airhead dits, the demon scoffed, his words causing Mitsuri's brain to stall for a moment. Airhead dits? She thought. Sure, she wasn't the smartest Hashira, Mitsuri firmly believed that honor belonged to Shinobu, but she wasn't stupid. That was so rude and uncalled for. Mitsuri thought before she leapt to dodge one of the dragons. She hoped the others would find that main body soon. That she could stall long enough for them to decapitate it. Where are we going? Nezuko asked. Genya responded by pinching his fingers into a claw-like shape. Ah, they were going after the main body. Nezuko spotted movement in the distance, a cocoon of trees. Over there. Genya turned to the direction Nezuko pointed in. Sure enough, the main body's protective shell was still close to that kid clone. Genya took aim with his shotgun, only to remember he had no ammo. And he didn't want to spend what few demon cells he still had left. Wait a second. He turned to Tanjiro. The little whack job didn't even hesitate to rip his fingers off, shoving them into Genya's mouth when he opened it to question the demon's sanity. Nezuko turned to Genya at the gesture from her brother. See? It pays to have a demon you don't have to risk your life trying to eat. She exclaimed with an ecstatic smile. Okay, so they're both insane. Genya thought as he started chewing, feeling the demonic cells transform him. Tanjiro smiled at him while he took aim. Before he could shoot, however, another scream attack was unleashed. Not directed at them, however. It was directed at the love Hashira. Mitsuri! Nezuko screamed before she began sprinting to the older girl. Tanjiro and Genya followed close behind. As they approached, it became obvious that the love Hashira had been stunned by the screech attack. Wait a sec. How is her body still intact at that range? Genya thought as they kept running. That attack rattled all their brains at a distance, it should have shattered this woman's skeleton and torn her muscles to shreds with how close she was. The demon approached, his gaze curious before he raised his fist, aiming a punch at the love Hashira's skull. Miss Kenroji! Miss Kenroji! Mitsuri looked up, meeting her suitor's gaze with a hopeful smile. No man would ever marry you. But if you're lucky, a boar, bear, or even a cow might, the man informed her, thoroughly crushing Mitsuri's hopes. Your unnatural hair color is bizarre. The thought of passing it down to my children makes me shudder, he added, pushing up his glasses. Let us pretend this arrangement never happened, and that we never met. Of course. Mitsuri whispered, trying not to burst into tears right then and there. That night, after asking her parents if she could ever hope to get married, Mitsuri had cried herself to sleep. She began dyeing her hair the next morning. Looking in the mirror, seeing her black hair, she felt like she was staring at a stranger. But this was better. Black hair would be a step in making herself a more appealing bride. And she could easily conceal her strength. She just had to avoid lifting anything particularly heavy, and arm wrestling anyone who could match her strength. Which was really anyone. The hard part was hiding her appetite. Mitsuri always loved eating, ever since she was little. Her voracious appetite had been what gave her her pink hair. Too many sakura machi. But they were always too yummy to resist. But she had to. Her appetite scared people off. But that didn't make it hurt less. It didn't erase the cramps in her stomach every time she saw a plate of her favorite foods. It didn't get rid of the lightheadedness as she starved herself. For weeks on end, Mitsuri would cry herself to sleep. Her stomach hurt, her head spun more often than not, her hair felt wrong. But it would be fine. She would find a husband, she would be happy. At least that's what she told herself. On the nights it felt like her stomach was going to cave in, or like her head was completely full of mud. Or when she stared absently at her stained hands after her latest reapplication of her hair dye. She forced herself to ignore the worried looks from her parents and siblings whenever she turned down a serving. It was for the best. It was for the best. Mitsuri was shaken back to reality by 3 bodies slamming into hers. The last memory she saw was of her last suitor before she stopped hiding. Stay away from her. Nezuko yelled, leaping with her brother in tow. Genya followed shortly after, and the trio pulled the love Hashira out of the way. That was way too close. Genya thought as Kanroji's eyes regained their focus. Come on. We can do this. Nezuko snapped. So long as Kanroji Mitsuri is alive, she's our ray of hope, and we have a chance. So we keep fighting. Genya nodded, and the trio turned to the dragons as they converged to release a combined attack. Tanjiro pulled Genya close and put himself over him and Nezuko, red fire blazing to life around them. However, the attack never came. Mitsuri saw Nezuko's smiling face, the younger girl's eyes practically glowing with awe. You're amazing, Mitsuri, she declared before hugging Mitsuri. You really think so? Mitsuri gasped, feeling a distinct sting in her eyes. Nezuko's smile widened, almost blinding in its brightness. Of course, the younger girl replied. You're appealing, and super strong. You'll do amazing things, I know it. Mitsuri returned the embrace as tightly as she could, smiling as her tears began to fall. Thank you, Nezuko, she whispered. It was the first time she'd been so highly complimented by someone other than her parents or siblings. As the city and Kikuchi began the process of repairing the damage from the bombs, Mitsuri and Rengoku decided to settle on a nearby rooftop. You did well, Kanroji. Mitsuri turned to her mentor, her eyes wide. I heard about what you did. Adapting flame breathing into your own style. Rengoku turned to her, his smile shining with pride. You're okay with that? She asked. Of course, Kanroji. Rengoku declared with a laugh, patting her shoulder. It is important that we can fight to our best. If that means using, or creating, a different breath style than what you were taught, then you have recognized your needs and adapted to them. Mitsuri smiled at that. Use the strength you were blessed with, Kanroji. You have it for a reason. Mitsuri hugged Rengoku, and the two left the city to debrief at the Ubuyashiki mansion and return to the Rengoku estate. As they ran, Mitsuri made a note to start working on a sword for her new breath style. What to call it? She thought, recalling her pounding heart and her longing to turn her love into her weapon. Love breathing had a nice ring to it. You have been blessed with a great gift, Mitsuri, the MSTR told her with a warm smile. Those who say otherwise merely fear your power. Mitsuri burst into tears, uncaring of any need for decorum and sobbing as she bowed to the leader of the corps. Thank you. Thank you so much, she wailed, feeling so free for the first time in ages. Congratulations on becoming a Hashira, Miss Kanroji, the Kikushi cheered when she told them the exciting news. Thanks. Mitsuri giggled, presenting a plate of sakura mochi to celebrate. Here. Mitsuri gasped at the wrapped box in front of her. What's this? She asked, her gaze switching from the box to the man beside her. Mr. Iguro, what's this? What is this? She exclaimed as she picked up the box. A gift. Iguro Abanai replied. For me. Mitsuri gasped. Kaburamaru nodded, and Mitsuri untied the ribbon. She nearly began crying from joy when she saw the folded haori, little cherry blossom petals contrasting against the green and white material. Oh, my gosh! You don't have to wear it, if you don't like it. Abanai told her. Are you kidding? I love it. Mitsuri squealed, pulling the haori out of its box and hugging it to her chest. Her heart fluttered at the thoughtfulness of it, and she immediately shrugged off her white haori to put on the new one. It's so appealing. I almost don't want to wear it, so it doesn't get ripped. Don't worry about it. I can get it replaced or repaired if you tear it. Abanai assured her. There's no need to fuss over preserving it. It's just a haori. No, it's so much more than that. Mitsuri protested. It's a appealing gift. I'll treasure it forever. Back then, she completely missed the way Abanai's ears darkened to a shade of red. We're so happy for you, Mitsuri, her father said. Her parents smiled tearfully. Mitsuri smiled brightly, Abanai's hand was in hers. I'm happy, too, she giggled, squeezing Abanai's hand before giving him a kiss on the temple. You've both raised an amazing woman, he said, his eyes shining with adoration. It made Mitsuri feel warm and fuzzy inside, knowing that gaze was directed at her. I'm grateful to have met her. And I promise to always make her happy, and give her nothing short of the best. Of course, dear, her mother replied. All we can ever ask of you is to make our little girl happy, she added, briefly turning to Mitsuri with her tearful smile before turning back to Abanai. After all the heartbreak she went through before meeting you, we're just grateful Mitsuri found someone who loves her for who she is. And I wouldn't have her any other way. Abanai replied, his gaze drifting to Mitsuri. She smiled in response, trying not to burst into tears of joy at that moment. It was just like Mitsuri imagined, and she felt like everything was absolutely perfect. Now, how about we celebrate? Semiki declared, getting a chorus of cheers around the table. Mitsuri turned to Abanai with a smile, then they went back to celebrating with her family. If she heard the whispers about her old suitors between her father and Abanai, she chose to ignore it. Thank you, Nezuko. Kanroji wailed. Everyone turned to her to find her waving her sword in the air with tears in her eyes. She deflected the entire attack. Genya thought. No wonder she was a Hashira. I'm so ashamed of myself. As a Hashira, I should be the one protecting all of you. The demon slayers are my home, and part of my family. Please forgive me. Kanroji continued, still waving her sword wildly. Give him hell, Mitsuri. Nezuko declared with a feral grin, her eyes blazing with either manic glee or idolizing awe. Genya wasn't sure he wanted to know which one it was. Kanroji matched the expression, though it was far more cutesy than Nezuko's. How the Hashira looked less terrifying than the normal slayer was a question Genya definitely didn't want the answer to. I plan to. Kanroji declared before whipping around to the dragon behind her. Then she caught it with her bare hands, holding it back with ease. Genya gaped at her strength. For such a clearly slender build, she packed quite a punch. Decapitate the main body. I've got this. Kanroji yelled, drawing her sword and leaping back into the fray. "Let's go!" Genya yelled. "The main body's getting away!" Nezuko exclaimed, pointing to the trees. Sure enough, the cocoon holding the main body was being moved into the forest. They had to end this as soon as possible. Even a Hashira only had so much stamina, they were still human, after all. Nezuko leapt onto the branch holding the cocoon, running along it as Tanjiro and Genya followed her example. "Tanjiro!" Genya called out. "Throw me ahead. If I can get a clear shot, I can slow it down." Tanjiro nodded, picking up Genya with ease and throwing him with all his might. Genya took aim, waiting until just the right moment, and fired at the branch. The second the bullet made contact with the wood, it combusted into red fire. "Whoa!" Nezuko gasped as she jumped over the fire. The cocoon lashed out with thin, WHP-like branches, clearly trying to protect its cargo. Nezuko used her sword to block as many hits as she could, but had to hold back a wince as a couple hit her foot. Genya and Tanjiro quickly grabbed onto the cocoon, the latter lighting it on fire with his blood demon art and burning most of the whipping branches. "Hurry! Pry it open!" Genya told Tanjiro as they both pulled with all their might. "Hinakami Kagura!" Nezuko yelled, raising her sword. "Flame dance!" She slashed down, then raised her sword again and cut across the cocoon, splitting it open. The demon was gone. The demon was gone. The cocoon was empty. Nezuko stared at the empty husk of charred wood. Then she felt a pull. She turned towards it, finding upper force scurrying away. There, she snapped before the trio took off running. "Gah! I'm sick of all this running around." Genya snapped, grabbing onto the nearest tree and ripping it from the earth. "Just quit running away. You stupid moron," he yelled as he threw the tree. "What the hell?" Nezuko though, gaping in shock as the tree landed right behind the demon. Tanjiro leapt for it, swinging his arm and only barely missing the other demon. Nezuko looked skyward as they continued running. The sky had begun to lighten, the sun would be rising soon. They had to hurry and decapitate the demon before it escaped and found shelter. Not to mention getting Tanjiro to safety before daybreak. Nezuko stumbled as pain raced through her newly injured foot, causing her to trail behind. Those branches had hit it pretty hard. "Stupid foot. I don't have time for this," she thought, gritting her teeth. She needed to close the distance without straining her foot. But how? Thunder breathing puts a lot of focus on your legs. It's kinda complicated. Zenitsu's voice echoed. "I have good legs. Could you teach me?" "I only know one form, Nezuko. Out of 6. I'd be a lousy teacher. I'll take whatever you can teach." "Well. Alright. I guess it wouldn't hurt to try." Zenitsu had sighed with a small smile, showing he relented. "Gramps always told me that you need to be aware of every muscle in your body and all the blood in your veins in order to really master it. That's it." Nezuko realized, dropping into the stance Zenitsu had taught her for the first form of thunder breathing. She could almost feel his guiding touch, directing her on how to position her legs and distribute her weight. She took a breath, focusing on pushing all the oxygen and blood she could into her uninjured leg as static raced across her limbs and through the air around her. She lowered her sword so it was close to her scabbard, but didn't sheath the blade. And then you push off, and you go faster than you ever thought you could. "Thank you, Zenitsu." Nezuko thought, deepening her kneel ever so slightly. Thunder breathing, first form. Thunderclap and flash. She sprung forward, the already great strength in her legs being enhanced by total concentration breathing. Lightning trailed behind her as she sped past Tanjiro and Genya. In the blink of an eye, the demon was in reach. Nezuko suched her breathing, and swung with all her might, fire dancing across the black steel as she cut into the demon's neck. "Come on. Decapitate him. Just a little more. Nezuko thought, pushing with all her strength. The demon turned to her with terrified eyes. Please, he wailed. Don't you feel the least bit sorry for such a pitiful being? Is he serious right now? Nezuko thought incredulously. Why would he, of all people, beg for pity? At his rank? She managed to push her sword a little more into his neck before he grew to a massive size. Do you not feel even a shred of sympathy? He asked before he grabbed Nezuko by the face. She yelped in surprise, and the demon began squeezing. With how the massive hand covered her nose and mouth, she couldn't breathe. Black spots began to dance across her vision, and her grip on her sword started to go slack. Cut it with the victim act. Genya yelled as he grabbed the hands holding Nezuko's face and began prying them off. As if an upper-rank Kizuki could ever be weak. As Genya continued his attempts to pry her free, Nezuko spotted Tanjiro leaping over upper 4. Red rained from her brother's arms. Once it landed on the demon, it ignited in a red inferno. Genya tore off the demon's arms, releasing Nezuko and allowing her to breathe again as upper 4 screeched in pain. Don't let go. Nezuko thought as the demon stumbled back, tightening her grip on her sword. You traitor. Upper 4 yelled as he continued to stumble. You will pay for your actions, little demon. Our MSTR will see to it. Over my dead body. Nezuko snapped. Just lose your head already, she yelled, her eyes widening when she saw the approaching cliff. Tanjiro leapt after her as upper 4 fell off the cliff, taking Nezuko with him. She got caught on a tree branch, but the two demons fell to the ground below. Nezuko coughed from the impact, unsurprised by the red dribbling from her mouth. If this fall didn't break any of her ribs, she'd be surprised. Nezuko. Tanjiro. Genya yelled. Nezuko's gaze drifted to Tanjiro, noticing how he wasn't moving. He must have lost consciousness. She watched Upper 4 get to his feet, and scrambled to get off the branch. Not good. Not good. If I don't get to Tanjiro before upper 4, Muzan will have him. Nezuko thought, yanking her leg loose from the branch and biting back a pained yelp as another stab of pain raced through her injured foot. You. Upper 4 snarled as he approached Tanjiro. You're coming with me. A gunshot echoed through the air, and the demon's shoulder lit on fire as the bullet pierced his flesh. You're not touching him. Genya shouted. Nezuko silently thanked him for his intervention. Upper 4's eyes widened, then he turned tail and ran. Genya kept firing, his shots bursting into red fire when they hit the demon. Get back here. Nezuko screamed as she finally managed to shimmy off the branch. You coward. Don't run away from your responsibilities. You hear me? Get back here, and atone for your sins. She dropped to the ground, landing beside Tanjiro. Just as she suspected, he was out cold. She turned to upper 4, watching him run toward a group of swordsmiths. Most likely planning to devour them. She glanced at the sky, continuing to lighten with the approaching daybreak. Damn it. I need a sword. Nezuko. At the familiar voice, Nezuko whipped around. As she did, she spotted a silhouette appearing dangerously close to her foot and stepped back slightly. A sword landed right in front of her, right where the silhouette formed. The sword from Yorichi Type 0. In the distance, she could see Takedo and Kotetsu. You brat. I haven't finished honing it. Nezuko yelled. Nezuko was pretty sure he had smacked Takedo. Don't you dare use that sword, brat. It's only been through the first stage. Touch it, and you're dead. The sun's rising. You have to hurry, before that demon gets away. Takedo yelled while Nezuko raged beside him. Use the sword. We're counting on you, Nezuko. Nezuko nodded, grabbing the blade. It had no guard, but all she needed was a Sharp sword. I'm sorry, Haganezuka. I'll bring it back when I'm done, and I promise not to break it, she told the swordsmith before she dropped into the first thunder-breathing stance again. This time, she used the Hinakami Kagura breathing technique, still focusing more on her leg. Hinakami Kagura and thunder breathing. First forms. She pushed off, fire and lightning dancing behind her. Dancing flash. She reached the demon again. Due to the lack of a need to swch breathing techniques this time, the blade cut through his neck easily. Nezuko dropped to the ground, barely managing to twist herself around so she didn't land on her injured foot. It was over, they won. Nezuko turned to the east. The sun would be up in moments. She turned to Tanjiro. She had to get him out of the open area before the sun rose. Huh. Tanjiro sat up, rubbing his eyes as Nezuko ran toward him. He looked at her, then stood up with wide eyes. Nezuko, he cried out as he ran towards her. Tanjiro, no. Nezuko yelled. She meant to continue, to warn him about the sun, but the fading adrenaline brought the pain in her ribs to the surface. She settled for grabbing onto Tanjiro when he tried to pass her. However, he struggled in her hold. Tanjiro, it's okay. It's over, I'm okay. We need to get you to a shaded spot before the sun rises. Nezuko wanted to say it, if only so that Tanjiro would go to find protection from the sun. No. Nezuko. Tanjiro pointed past Nezuko, right to where she had beheaded the demon. Run, a swordsmith cried as Nezuko turned to where her brother was pointing, her own eyes widening at the sight that greeted her. Are you kidding me? Nezuko asked herself. Upper 4 was still moving, running towards the frantic swordsmiths. And he wasn't disintegrating. She turned to the severed head. She had decapitated it, so why on earth was it still? Resentment. The main body had fear written on its tongue. The body she had just decapitated was another decoy to shield it. They still hadn't decapitated the main body. DMN it. We have to hurry. Nezuko exclaimed as the sun's rays began to peek over the horizon. They didn't have much time. Amichim. Tanjiro nodded, and the siblings began sprinting for the headless body. They had to be fast, if they wanted to save the swordsmiths. Not to mention giving themselves enough time to get Tanjiro out of danger from the sun. I messed up. Nezuko thought as she ran, and the first rays of daybreak began to peek over the mountains. She pushed herself to go faster, even as her body cried out in protest. She had to get to the main body before the light reached them. I should have paid more attention to what I was cutting. If we don't get there in time, the swordsmiths will be killed. I can't let. Pain screaming startled Nezuko out of her thoughts, followed by the smell of smoke and burning flesh from behind her. She turned around, her eyes widening in horror at what she was met with. Tanjiro, screaming as he tried to shield himself from the rising sun, skin burning and smoking. Even with the scarce rays of early dawn, he was already badly burnt, and his attempt at protecting himself was proving pointless. Tanjiro. Nezuko shrieked as she threw herself over her brother in an attempt to shield him. Shrink. Hurry. You have to get smaller. Nezuko. Tanjiro mumbled as he followed her instructions, though his eyes remained focused on the escaping upper 4. He was still burning. Nezuko's attempt at shielding him wasn't enough. And she didn't have her Haori, so she had no way to increase the area of her shadow or better protect him. She turned to the swordsmith's screams. While upper 4 was also burning, it wasn't fast enough. He would kill the swordsmiths before he died. Nezuko looked around, hoping someone was close enough to kill the demon. Genya still hadn't made it down the cliff, Takedo wasn't showing any signs of making his way over. Mitsuri was nowhere in sight, likely still fighting that body with the wooden dragons. It's all up to me. Nezuko realized. Come on, Nezuko. Just go. You don't have time, let go of Tanjiro and go. You have a job to do. Why is it so hard to just move? It suddenly felt impossible to breathe. Was it because of the smoke from Tanjiro? What do I do? What do I do? Nezuko asked herself. All she could hear were her choked gasps for air and her pounding heart. The scent of her brother burning alive in her arms invaded her nose. It had to be the smoke causing her to struggle breathing, right? Gods, she felt like she was going to vomit. If I stay, the villagers will be killed. They need me. I have to do my job. But if I go, Tanjiro's going to burn in the sun. All because I didn't pay enough attention to which body I was beheading. I'm such an idiot. I can't decide. I can't leave him. Why can't I do this? Why was this so hard? It should have been easy to make the choice. One person that few in the Corps even knew about, let alone trusted, or the people the Corps undeniably needed in the fight. The demon slayers needed the swordsmiths, they should be the priority. But this was her brother, the only family she had left. She couldn't bring herself to let go of him. She couldn't bear the thought of losing him after she lost the rest of their family. After all the hard work she put in to protect him and eventually turn him back into a human, could she really let it all be for nothing by letting him die? Nezuko was pulled out of her mental tug-o-war by Tanjiro grabbing her arm. She looked at her big brother, seeing the familiar fire of determination in his eyes despite how much of his skin had already burned off. Go. Tanjiro whispered. He had to be in agony as he slowly burned to death, but he didn't let it show. I can't leave you. Nezuko replied shakily as tears ran down her cheeks. Tanjiro reached out to her, placing his free hand on her cheek. Nezuko tried to ignore the scent of burning flesh, tightening her embrace around Tanjiro. Go. Tanjiro said, more firmly than before. Then, he rolled over and kicked Nezuko into the air. As she flipped through the air, Nezuko had one last moment of eye contact with her brother. He smiled, despite the pain he had to be in as he burned, and clenched his hand into a fist over his chest. Over his heart. Nezuko wanted to scream, or cry, or something, but her throat wouldn't cooperate. She could only stare with tears burning in her eyes. She could only watch her kind, stubborn, stupidly selfless big brother slowly be reduced to ashes. I'm sorry, Tanjiro. I failed you. Nezuko thought before turning her focus back to Upper 4. She could mourn Tanjiro once the demon was dead. For now, she had a job to do. So, with tears in her eyes, she raised her sword and took a breath. Nezuko landed, and immediately went about trying to find the main body. It couldn't have gotten far, or her instincts would have told her. Damn it, where the hell are you? She screamed, rage and frustration combining with her fresh grief. She ran after the headless decoy, adrenaline and fury numbing the pain of her injuries. She wasn't letting this demon get away. Not after Tanjiro sacrificed himself to make sure she got to the monster before it could claim another life. As she sprinted across the field, the demon flickered. Its muscles and organs were visible, including its heart. And inside the heart. The main body. There you are. Nezuko snarled, leaping into the air with her sword raised. You're not getting away from me again, you coward. I'm dragging you to hell with my bare hands. If I have to. Nezuko swung her sword, slicing through the outer shell and exposing the main body. But she didn't aim her next swing for the main demon's neck. Instead, she stabbed it and pinned it to the ground. As the demon slayer girl's blade pinned him to the earth, Hantengu felt terror like he'd never felt in his life. The memories from Lord Muzin's cells, his life flashing before his eyes, the fact he was immobilized and completely exposed to the sun. He looked into the girl's eyes, finding nothing but hatred that burned like the rising sun on his skin. It almost felt as if he were facing the wrath of Amaterasu herself. But, maybe he could get out of this. Perhaps, if he pleaded for it, the gods would see fit to spare him. Maybe he could convince the girl to let him live, just as she'd let the other demon live. After all, it wasn't his fault. He wasn't the one to blame. Surely, she would see that, and spare his life. Please, the demon wailed, its outer shell burning away and leaving the main body exposed to the sun's unforgiving light. Please, have mercy, I beg you. Then beg. Beg all you want. It won't save you. Nezuko yelled, forcing all the venom she could into her voice despite how much her eyes stung with unshed tears. My brother is dead. He sacrificed himself so I could end your worthless life. Your cowardice took away the last of my family, she cried, tightening her grip on the sword. And I will keep you here, unable to move as you burn in the sun, until all that is left of your pathetic existence is dust, she screamed, twisting her sword and eliciting a pained wail from upper four. And once you die, I hope you will never be allowed to reincarnate. That you will rot in hell for eternity. Please. It wasn't my fault. Please forgive me. Upper four continued crumbling to ash, still babbling and begging despite the whining falling on deaf ears. Forcing it to burn in the sun instead of decapitating it was cruel, but Nezuko didn't care anymore. In fact, a part of her enjoyed watching this pathetic demon squirm and writhe as it attempted in vain to escape its deserved death. She wanted to watch it suffer the exact same way Tanjiro had to have suffered in his final moments. To let the worthless piece of filth feel the same agony trying to rip her heart to pieces. The fact finally settled in as Upper Four's mouth turned to ash, cutting off its begging. Her brother, the last piece she had left of her family, was dead. All that was left of him was ashes that would soon be swept away in the wind. There wouldn't even be any bones left when she went back to where she left him. What am I going to do when this is all over? As soon as that question settled in her mind, Nezuko felt herself break. She felt an ache in her chest as memories flooded her mind. Tanjiro fighting alongside her, even when he lost limbs and bled to protect her. Tanjiro's smile as their siblings all played with and around him. His laughter, even as their roughhousing knocked him over. His embrace, the familiar warmth that had always been a constant in her life. Even during the most difficult of times, that warmth was there. Their home. Their parents. Takeo. Hanako. Shigeru. Rokuta. That life had its challenges, but they always overcame the adversities with smiles on their faces. Because life wasn't easy, but they were happy. Because they had each other, and that was all that mattered. That life was long gone. Nothing more than a memory she would never live again. Because she had nothing left. Everyone from that life was dead now. Her father by illness, her mother and younger siblings by the Demon King himself. The only family she had left was taken by the son he seemed to so fully embody, even as a demon. All because of her own stupidity. Her inattentiveness had cost Tanjiro his life. Tears fell from her eyes, landing in the grass below as a sob tore its way out of her throat. Nezuko was truly alone in the world, now. She was the only Kamado still alive. And she hated it. She detested it with every fiber of her being. Why was she the one who was spared? Why was she the only one still standing? What did her family do, for all of them to die while she lived on like a DMN cockroach? Even as the last traces of Upper Four crumbled away, Nezuko couldn't stop crying. She couldn't celebrate a victory that had cost her everything. Why couldn't it have been her, instead? She hunched over, resting her forehead against the new sword, and wailed. As Nezuko sailed through the air, Tanjiro tried not to let his pain show. The sensation of his skin burning and crumbling away was excruciating, and the skin that hadn't burned away didn't feel much better. But if this was how he was going to die, he was okay with it. He helped Nezuko and the others, he fought with everything he had, and he was sure that the demon would not live to kill another human. I'm sorry, Nezuko. I guess I'm not going to become human again. Tanjiro thought, closing his eyes and accepting his fate. He could faintly hear wailing in the distance as the world faded to black. The most prominent scent in the air was grief. He wished he could apologize to Nezuko for causing her so much pain. That he could hug her, wipe up her tears, and comfort her one last time. Just once would be enough. Tanjiro gasped for air, the world coming back into focus. He could feel his skin regenerating, yet he could still feel the sun's warmth. I'm not burning anymore. Tanjiro realized as he watched the burns in question heal. His regeneration seemed faster than before, at least when he wasn't pushing himself to his limit. Tanjiro turned to the direction he had sent Nezuko in, getting to his feet before unsteadily making his way to his sister. He had to get to her. He had to make sure she was okay. As he got closer to Nezuko, the mixed sense of grief, regret, and sadness were almost overwhelming the charcoal and mountain wildflowers he recognized as his little sister. When he found her, she was hunched over her sword. The weapon was stabbing the ground, a bit of ash floating away in the wind while Nezuko sobbed. Nezuko? Tanjiro tentatively called out. She kept crying, not even turning in his direction. Did she not hear him? The masked people turned to him, and he could smell their shock. Lady Kamado, one of them gasped, pointing to Tanjiro. Nezuko straightened up and whipped around, her eyes releasing a seemingly unending flow of tears and her cheeks stained with tear tracks, and Tanjiro smiled. He took a step closer. Good, Nezuko's eyes widened, the scent of disbelief slowly overwhelming the grief. Good morning, Nezuko. Tanjiro said. We won. Nezuko's tears began anew, but were now accompanied by the scent of relief mixed with shock as she let go of the blade. She took a step forward, stumbling before the masked people caught her and brought her closer. Tanjiro, she gasped, slowly reaching out to him. Is it really you? Are you, human? Are you all right? She asked as her hand began trembling. Nezuko practically collapsed into Tanjiro's arms, sobbing into his haori while he hugged her as tightly as he could without hurting her. Really? Tanjiro. Tanjiro muttered, rubbing circles into her back. Tanjiro is, all right. Are you all right? Nezuko? His sister's sobbing got louder, and Tanjiro gently grabbed onto the back of her uniform. Tanjiro. Nezuko wailed. You're alive. Oh, thank Hinakami, you're alive. She leaned back, smiling despite the tears flowing from her eyes. You're healed. And you're in the sun. How? She gasped with a breathless laugh that sounded dangerously close to another sob. Alive, thank Hinakami. Tanjiro replied with a smile. Healed, son. I'm just glad you're still alive. Nezuko told him before hugging him again. After a moment, she leaned back a little. To the shock of everyone around them, she punched Tanjiro in the shoulder. Lady Kamado, one of the masked people yelped as they all rushed to grab Nezuko before she collapsed. Tanjiro didn't mind the punch, though. It wasn't like the punch was particularly hard, and Nezuko's scent held no genuine animosity towards him. He knew she could and would hit harder if she was actually mad. Don't you ever scare me like that again, you hear me? If you come this close to death again, I am going to give you the hardest forehead flick I can. I don't care if I have to wait until I die, I am kicking your sorry backside into next century. Nezuko yelled, jabbing her finger into his forehead. Tanjiro kept smiling in response. Thank Hinakami. Don't scare. Nezuko, again. Tanjiro chuckled, pulling Nezuko in for another hug. Don't scare, Nezuko. Son, heal. He knew there should have been more words, but his head still felt too fuzzy to remember the right ones to use. Don't strain yourself. Nezuko replied. I'm glad you're speaking a little more, really, but take it easy. You can rest. You, rest, too. Nezuko. Tanjiro told her. Nezuko chuckled breathlessly, and Tanjiro turned around to hoist her onto his back. He could feel Nezuko nuzzling into his shoulder, and smiled as he responded with a gentle tap of his head against hers. He was just glad she was okay. Well done, Hantengu. As the connection vanished with Upper Four's death, Muzan smiled. The last thing Hantengu saw was Kamado Tanjiro, standing in the sun. Conquering the sun. His guess had been right. That infuriating boy had been the perfect choice, and his unique constitution would help Muzan achieve perfection. It seems you're enjoying yourself, Toshikuni. Ah. Right. The adopted mother of the child he had been masquerading as. I can get you some more books, if you'd. The woman's head went flying, spraying blood everywhere. It wasn't like Muzan was planning on letting her live much longer anyways, since she had outlived her usefulness. After all this time, I no longer need the blue spider lily. Muzan chuckled as he let his disguise fall away, easily replacing the clothes he tore in the process. This is why I've been creating demons all these centuries, even when I didn't want to, he declared with an excited grin. A rare condition that never appeared, even in the 12 Kizuki. Oh, how perfectly things have fallen into place. All I need is that boy. Once I devour Kamado Tanjiro, I will absorb his properties. And when I do, I will also conquer the accursed sun. Murderer. Muzan turned to the maid. He hadn't noticed her before. Had he been getting rusty with his perception, or was she just that insignificant? Murderer. She was dead in an instant. Not even worth the air she breathed, then, and barely worth the time taken to kill her. Muzan stared at the pair of corpses, flicking the blood off his hand with a bored glare. He walked towards the door, kicking aside any limbs that got in his way as he left the room. Centuries. Centuries of a life in the shadows. Of creating demons. Hoping for one of them to be able to walk under the sun, or at least locate that Dmed plant. And now he had a demon out there that had done both, just beyond his grasp. The chosen demon, the perfect being. The only thing that could have made this turn of events better would have been if the Kamado boy hadn't managed to slip from his hold, but he would make do. He'd spent 1,000 years searching for a way to conquer the sun. He could wait a little while longer to acquire it, now that he had confirmed its existence. Besides, even with that family's knowledge of sun breathing, it wouldn't be enough. Neither of those children were anywhere near that man's level. They'd never even come close to killing him, no matter how much that technique sent ice racing down his spine. Of that, he was certain. Soon, Muzan would have the ability to conquer the sun. He would be the perfect being, unkillable and eternal. Not even that technique would be able to kill him, assuming any practitioners were around when he was done. But first, he had to make preparations, and ensure those infernal pests wouldn't keep him from his key to eternity. Not to mention getting rid of that annoying brat the Kamado boy always fought beside. The chosen demon's own sister. Nezuko, he believed her name was. Regardless, she continued to be quite the thorn in his side since they crossed paths in Asakusa. Killing 3 of his 12 Kizuki, and seeming to survive his attempts to end her life out of nothing short of pure spite. Like an infuriating little cockroach that he wished he could just squash already. Over my dead body, the girl had screamed when Hantengu attempted to capture Tanjiro. Very well, brat. Muzan thought with a smirk. If you insist your brother is to be taken over your corpse, that can be arranged. But perhaps that's too merciful for the vermin that is your infuriatingly persistent bloodline. Tanjiro turned to the scar-faced boy, finding the turquoise boy approaching them. Good morning. Tanjiro called out with a wave. The turquoise boy turned to him. His eyes and scent were different from before. Taquito. Nezuko mumbled as she straightened up from where she had been resting her head on Tanjiro's shoulder. A part of him wanted to tell her to keep resting, but he supposed she wasn't doing too much while he was still carrying her. You're okay. Thanks to you and Tanjiro the boy, Takedo chuckled. Because of you two, I found something very important to me that I lost. So thank you, from the bottom of my heart. I don't know what we did, but you're welcome. Nezuko replied. You're welcome. Tanjiro echoed, getting a confused glance from Takedo. What's going on with Tanjiro? He asked. Tanjiro smiled in response. Oh. Nezuko replied. Well, you see. You guys. Hey, you guys. Everyone turned to the noise to find Mitsuri emerging from the forest, running towards Genya and Takedo. We did it. We won. And we all survived. Mitsuri sobbed as she threw her arms around the two boys, tears in her eyes but boundless joy in her expression otherwise. Genya's face reddened in Mitsuri's arms while Takedo remained unfazed. Mitsuri! Nezuko exclaimed, reaching over Tanjiro's shoulder to hug the love Hashira. Nezuko! Mitsuri wailed with a massive smile, eagerly returning the embrace. We won. I know. I know. We did it. Nezuko exclaimed tearfully as the two girls separated. You're crying. Mitsuri yelped. Is everything okay? Everything okay. Tanjiro spoke up with a smile. Thank Hinakami. Everything is okay. Good morning, me. Mitsuri. Good morning, Mitsuri. Mitsuri gasped as she took a few steps back, staring at Tanjiro with wide eyes. Then she burst into tears again, enveloping Tanjiro in a bone-crushing hug. Literally, everyone heard his ribs cracking, even if he didn't seem to mind. Tanjiro, she squealed. You're outside. In the sun. I'm so happy for you. She turned to Nezuko. For both of you. I'm so happy. Nezuko smiled as tears began pouring down her face again. It's a miracle. I don't know how this happened, but I'm so glad it did, she chuckled tearfully before leaning onto Tanjiro's shoulder. Again. Kamado. Nezuko turned her head to find a fuming Haganezuka glaring at her with nothing short of murderous fury. Where's the sword? I haven't finished honing it. You'd better not have broken it. Where is it? He demanded as he stomped toward the siblings. I think I left it in the ground when I stabbed the demon. Nezuko mumbled, unable to shake the sense of danger lurking around the corner. But Upper 4 was already dead by now. She watched him burn herself. Even if he was somehow still alive, he had no means by which to attack. No excuses. Haganezuka snapped, regaining Nezuko's attention. His expression made it clear. Until they found the ancient sword, Haganezuka would assume she broke it. Therefore, she was dead meat if she didn't get away. Tanjiro, run, she exclaimed, straightening up and shaking her brother's shoulders. Run. Tanjiro repeated excitedly before he started actually running, easily leaving Haganezuka in the dust despite going at a much more sedate pace. Despite the fact Haganezuka was out for blood, Nezuko couldn't keep herself from laughing with glee. It felt just like when they were kids, when Tanjiro would run around the clearing with her clinging to his back, or the both of them running around with one of their other siblings on their backs. Nezuko tightened her hold, leaning onto Tanjiro's shoulder as she continued laughing. She had no idea how much she had missed this before now. As the cart came to a stop, Nezuko turned to the chief. We can't thank you enough, my dear, he said. And where is your brother? Nezuko turned to the box beside her with a tired smile. He's resting. Probably needs it, after everything that happened, she replied. Ah, yes, the chief chuckled. I'm glad he's all right. Thank you. Nezuko replied with a nod. Rustling turned their attention to the nearby cliff face, and the figure sulking behind a rock. Kanamori. Is that Hataru? The chief inquired. It is. Kanamori sighed dejectedly. He's been sulking ever since Lady Kamado used the ancient sword before he could finish it. Hey, Takedo threw it at me. Nezuko retorted. And what was I supposed to do? Let that prick eat those swordsmiths, just to avoid facing his wrath. I'm not surprised, the chief muttered. Hataru. Get over here, he called out, prompting the swordsmith he was referring to emerge from his sulking spot. I said come over here, the chief yelled. Haganezuka made his way over, and Nezuko could feel the pout behind the mask. Didn't you have something you wanted to say to Nezuko? Does he? Nezuko wondered. Humph, Haganezuka huffed, crossing his arms like a grumpy toddler. Hataru, the chief said scoldingly. The reason Lady Kamado came all the way out here was to see you. The least you could do is hear her out. Haganezuka, Nezuko trailed off, trying to pick her words well. I wanted to say thank you. For working so hard on my swords, even after I've damaged or misplaced them so many times. I really do appreciate it. Haganezuka tensed up, but Nezuko got the feeling he was in a bit of a better mood. You have my best wishes for your work on that ancient sword. I know it'll be your best work yet. Haganezuka grunted, and Nezuko couldn't help smiling. Just like Inosuke when he first joined us. She thought. I'll get back to work on your sword as soon as possible. Stand by at the Butterfly Mansion. Haganezuka told her. You got it. Nezuko replied. Thank you. Are you blushing, Mr. Haganezuka? Kotetsu asked. Everyone whipped around to the boy while Haganezuka grunted again. Don't tell me you're embarrassed. Kotetsu said with a laugh. Young Kotetsu, Kanamori spoke up. Nezuko also considered speaking up, but decided to stay silent and watch the show. It would be quite entertaining to see. And maybe she was being a little petty after the Yorichi Type 0 training. Not that she would admit it to the little tyrant. You act all tough, but I guess you're just a big ol' softy. Kotetsu declared. Haganezuka lunged, swinging the poor kid around. Nezuko had to suppress a laugh as a cough. Haganezuka's passionate reactions were kind of funny, when she wasn't on the receiving end of them. Oh, what am I going to do with them, the chief sighed. Well, I suppose you should be going. Best of luck to you, Lady Kamado, he told Nezuko before a Kikuchi approached. Same as when you came here, you'll need these on the journey to the Butterfly Mansion, she said, holding up the BLNDFLD and earplugs. Nezuko accepted the inhibitors, feeling the gentle bounce of the wagon for a moment. Then it stopped. Huh? Why are we stopping? Nezuko asked. To her surprise, her BLNDFLD and earplugs were removed, and she was met with a massive crowd of cheering villagers. Nezuko couldn't help gaping in shock, hearing the villagers' thanks and well wishes. How about we wait until we reach the bottom of the mountain, the Kikuchi pulling the wagon offered. Nezuko turned to the woman with a bright smile. Sounds great, she answered. The wagon began moving again, and Nezuko couldn't keep the smile off her face as she waved back and returned the thanks and well wishes the people of the Swordsmith village gave. She felt better than she'd felt in a long time.